Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Emily woke up at 0700 hours as usual. She didn't even need an alarm clock. Her body knows when it's time to get up. The bedroom was silent. Only the light sniffling of Jason, sleeping peacefully next to her, broke the silence. Emily slipped carefully out of bed, careful not to wake her husband. She took a couple steps and stretched sweetly. Feeling a pleasant heaviness in her body after yesterday's busy day, full of creative work, she remembered how she had finished painting the children's room in soft pastel colors. The customers, a young middle-income family, were delighted. "Thank you very much. Our daughter now thinks she lives in a fairy tale world," said customer Jennifer. "You're welcome. May my work bring your daughter joy, peace, and comfort," Emily replied with a smile. It gave her strength and confidence despite the constant doubts and ridicule from some people close to her. This was especially true of Jason, her husband, a middle-aged businessman who had spent his life striving for stability and traditional values. Unfortunately, he had never understood Emily's passion for painting, considering it a frivolous occupation that brought no real income and no confidence in the future. "It's your paint strokes again," Jason often said. "When are you going to get a real job? It's already embarrassing for Mom. How are we going to live on your art? It's a good thing my business keeps us fed." Sabara, the mother-in-law, was even more critical and never missed an opportunity to jab her daughter-in-law with sarcastic remarks. "So Emily, you're fiddling with your colors again. When will you finally find a proper job that would be of some use to the family? Why don't you go work as a manager or a secretary, or have you decided to become a great artist? I hope you're not wasting our money on those pointless activities. It's good that our surname in the registry office did not take, or else the shame of this mess." The phrase came out scathing and very painful, but it didn't bother Barbara. Emily tried to ignore the sarcastic attacks, but sometimes they hurt. Of course, she knew that Jason and his mother didn't share her passion for art, didn't see anything of value in it but meaningless scribbles on canvases. Sometimes it seemed as if Barbara deliberately chose her moments to jab her, to humiliate her, to make her feel like a failure. But, on the other hand, her mother-in-law didn't work anywhere herself and wasn't even going to look for something suitable. It seemed that everything suited her. The son works and she is engaged in the upbringing of a stubborn daughter-in-law, since God hadn't given her a grandchild. But today Emily had a special feeling. A few days ago, she had placed an ad on a freelance website and had been waiting impatiently for any response ever since. Her mood was elevated, as if a premonition of something good was in the air. She made her way to the kitchen where Barbara was preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the place, but the atmosphere was tense. "Good morning," Emily said, trying to speak cheerfully, though inside her, she was clenching with the anticipation of another round of ridicule. She had never called her mother-in-law mother, as she believed there could only be one mother. "Morning, Emily," Barbara replied without turning around. "You're awake already. Then it's time to get to work. Pick up a paintbrush." Jason, who had just entered the kitchen, looked tired, but when he noticed Emily, he frowned. "Didn't you check your work email? I need to find some important documents. The laptop is glitching again," he said, sipping his coffee. "No, Jason, I haven't looked yet. I'll do it after breakfast," said Emily, who was also keeping an eye on all the gadgets in the house. "It'll have to be quick. It's urgent, actually," her husband grumbled unhappily. Emily, not wanting to continue the argument, retreated to the living room to check her email on her home laptop. She turned on the computer, expecting to see more emails with promotional offers and other spam. Opening the mailbox, she saw a message from an unknown address. Judging by the subject line, it was an order to paint walls in a country house. But her heart fluttered with joy. She quickly opened the letter and could hardly contain her excitement. It was a solid order, a mural with a unique Art Nouveau design. Finally, something worthwhile, Emily exclaimed. Unable to contain her emotion, she excitedly ran her eyes over the details of the order. The style, the color, the customer's special requests. Unbelievable. I can finally prove to Jason and Barbara that I'm still worth something, she whispered and covered her face with her hands. Overjoyed, she immediately rushed to call her husband and mother-in-law to share the news. Jason, look, Emily exclaimed, showing the screen. I've been sent a large original order. Her husband grinned in disbelief as he looked at the screen. Emily, are you sure this isn't a joke? Or maybe it's just another attempt to swindle you out of money under the pretense of a job? No, it's really a real job. Here, look at the details, the terms and conditions. It's a serious job that can bring a good profit, Emily exclaimed. And how could it be? And don't get your hopes up. At best, they'll pay like last time, $0.003. Barbara snorted. Or maybe the customer just decided to have fun making fun of your naivete. Tears glistened in Emily's eyes. Barbara, please. There's no need to exaggerate. This is a chance for me to show what I can do. Well, then show it. I hope you won't ask me for money to buy paints, her mother-in-law remarked sarcastically. Her words hurt. Emily felt her eyes begin to fill with tears, but still held back, realizing she shouldn't give in to her emotions. I can handle it and do it myself, she said, trying to suppress the tremor in her voice. Of course you will. Who would mind? Just don't forget, I warned you. And don't expect me to help you with my advice, Barbara said dismissively. Jason noticed that the wife is upset. Emily tried to smooth things over. Let's talk about this another time. I've got an important business trip coming up, and you've got a fine arts discussion going on. Okay, son, that's up to you. Just remember these paints and brushes are already here. I'm fed up. You better think of your children. 5 years of marriage and still no grandchild. My friends are laughing at me. They say that soon they will give me grandchildren on rent, so that I will not get bored, exclaimed her mother-in-law. Emily didn't answer, just nodded and left the room. She needed to be alone for a while, to calm down, to gather her thoughts. Already in her room, she opened the letter again and began to scrutinize the details of the order. First of all, she had to develop a sketch, coordinate it with the client, and then start working. I will definitely do it and prove them wrong, Emily whispered like an incantation. After thinking for a moment, she picked up the paints and brushes on the table and began to create. It seemed that with her stroke, not only sketches for future rooms were born, but also for a new life, full of colors and self-confidence. Emily spent most of the day at work, sketching, working out details and thinking through the composition. She wanted to create something special that would impress the customer and make everyone who doubted her reconsider their opinion. But finally the sketch was ready, and she sent it to the client with bated breath, waiting for a reply. Several hours passed. Emily couldn't concentrate on anything, constantly double-checking her email. All day she had been flying like she was on wings. It seemed as if she could roll mountains. Even her husband and mother-in-law seemed less annoying. Finally, the long-awaited reply came. Your sketch is amazing, the customer wrote. We are delighted with your work. We want to work with you. Emily could not believe her eyes. She liked her sketch and got a good order. Happy, she hurried to tell Jason and Barbara about it. Look, exclaimed Emily, showing the letter. They have accepted my sketch. I have received the order. Let's start work. Her husband looked at her with a certain irony in his eyes. though he didn't hold out much hope that Emily would actually be able to get the order. "But I'm glad it worked out this way. I hope you don't regret your choice," he said as if reluctantly. Barbara, who was sitting in the chair, smirked meaningfully, making it clear that she didn't believe in her sister-in-law in any way. The next day, armed with a navigator and a good mood, Emily went to the customers. The difficulty was that there were 2 streets with the same name in the city. And for some reason, the connection with a customer was cut off at the most interesting place. But Emily did not despair, decided to find the house she needed by the method of elimination. Country Cottage Village turned out to be quiet and cozy. Beautiful, neat houses drowning in greenery lined up leisurely along the winding paths. Emily could hardly get her bearings. The address on the letter wasn't very informative. Finally, she found the right 2-story house with panoramic windows, surrounded by a high fence. The door was opened by a young woman with a cold, almost indifferent look. The owner of the house was dressed expensively, but not flashily: white pants, a strict sweater. "Who are you?" she asked instead of greeting, not inviting her guest into the house. "I'm Emily Lebedeva, a decorative artist. You asked me to paint the walls," Emily replied, a little embarrassed. The landlady frowned, as if remembering something. That was a quick response. "I guess the contractors who did my roof had been fast. All right, come on in. I'll show you the nursery. By the way, my name is Victoria." "No middle name," the woman said, as if she didn't need anything. Emily shrugged and followed, knowing full well that their correspondence had been about painting the whole house, not just the nursery. What did it matter, though? Maybe she'd just changed her mind. They the rich, as they say, 7 Fridays in a week. The house was almost perfectly clean. Everything was neat and tidy, without a single superfluous detail. Victoria led her with an indifferent look into the children's room, a spacious, bright room with large windows. "Here," she said, pointing to an empty wall, "I want you to paint it. The theme is nautical, blue and white tones and some gold. No cartoon characters, just waves, ships. Just to make it nice and classy." "I see," Emily said. Looking around the room, "I liked your idea." "What about the cost?" Victoria asked, looking at Emily with undisguised irony. "I can put together an estimate with materials and the complexity of the job. It will take about a couple weeks in total," Emily replied, again surprised that she had already chatted about this topic in correspondence. "In 2 weeks. That's actually a long time," Victoria replied grudgingly. "But it takes time to procure the materials and, of course, to paint the murals. It's handmade," Emily explained. Victoria was silent for a few seconds, then nodded in agreement. "Okay, go ahead and do it if that's the way you want to do it. You just saved me the trouble of picking out paint and so on." "Of course I'll do it, don't worry," Emily replied readily. Then she asked cautiously, "Where's your son and what's his name?" The question was asked seemingly naturally, but the expression on Victoria's face changed dramatically. Her eyes narrowed with displeasure, her lips compressed into a solid, thin line. "Kirill is out with the nanny right now. Don't worry," Victoria cut her off. Emily felt uncomfortable. It suddenly seemed to her that the question had made Victoria irritated, maybe even angry. So that was why she didn't dare to insist, though a strange feeling had arisen in her soul. It felt like Victoria was treating her child with some inexplicable disdain and coolness. Emily said goodbye and walked out of the house. Her mood had soured a little. She knew perfectly well that order was good, money was even better, but working in such a strange place was not what she wanted at all. Emily took a few steps down the path as she suddenly heard a baby crying. It was coming from somewhere on the street. She stopped. She listened. The cry was loud, shrill, and desperate. God, what's happened to that baby? Emily thought, looking around. At that moment, the nanny came out from around the corner of the house. a tall, stout woman with a sullen face. She was leading by the hand a boy about 6 years old who was sobbing uncontrollably. "What's wrong with him?" Emily asked anxiously. "I fell off his bike," the woman replied without looking at Emily. "It's nothing to worry about. That Johnny's always getting into stories. My name's Sarah, and you must be the new girl, right?" Emily was visibly embarrassed. No, I'm a scenic artist. I'm going to be painting walls." Sarah grinned. "I see. It's my last day working here today, and the landlady is still a problem customer, and the little boy is no better. And it's always my punishment. The landlady goes to the restaurant, has fun, and I have to sit with my son. No privacy. I haven't been replaced in 4 days. None of them can stand it, not a child, but a problem." Emily didn't believe it. Her intuition told her that the boy was being cranky for a reason. The boy with the big gray eyes was breathing rapidly, his body shaking with sobs. "Could he be in pain?" Emily asked. "Oh, none of your business. We had a physical with him the other day, so he's fine." The nanny cut her off. Emily wanted to object, but then changed her mind, realizing that there seemed to be no room for goodwill or sympathy in this family. It was as if the whole place was imbued with indifference to one another. With a disapproving glance at Emily, Sarah went into the house with Johnny. Back at her place, Emily tried to avoid talking to her mother-in-law, who appeared to be eagerly awaiting her return. "What? Have you worked so fast already? I thought at least you wouldn't be slacking on your first day of work," Barbara said. Emily turned pale. "And who told you I was slacking? I've actually been familiarizing myself with the front of the work, communicating with the client." Barbara shook her head. "That's what your job is all about. Communication, communication, communication. And the output is nothing. Nothing. That's right. The lazy, like the hunchbacked, can only be reformed by the grave." Tears glistened in Emily's eyes. But why did all mothers-in-law have mothers-in-law? And why did she get this snake in human form? A mother-in-law should be a second mother to her daughter-in-law, so that she feels her love and care. And here what? Only reproaches from morning till night. If you pay attention to your husband, the house is wrong again. You don't bring enough money. And you can't give birth to children. If you make a lot of money, Barbara will have another reason. If only she wanted to. Emily decided not to argue and went to her room. Why spoil her mood when she had very little left? Barbara would never be satisfied. You could walk around on your head or sing karaoke songs. You'll only get your share of negativity. Since Jason had gone on another business trip, Emily spent the rest of the evening in her room. She didn't want to eat dinner, nor did she want to see his mother's disgruntled face in the kitchen. Barbara had become a real guardian of the refrigerator. As soon as Emily got a couple of eggs for an omelet, her mother-in-law was there. "Emily, that's my son's money. Or have you forgotten? Get yourself a separate shelf in the refrigerator and eat with your own money." "I already gave you everything I earned a couple days ago." "It's a decent amount by the standards of our town," Emily countered. Barbara's face immediately turned crimson at those words, and she looked like one big tomato. "Decent money? Beggars on the porch have more than that. I'd rather you stood under the church with your hand out. You'd get more use out of it." Usually Emily's nervous system couldn't stand the second minute of such communication, and she went straight to her room. Like this. Left alone with her paints and sketchbook, the moment when the muse comes to the creator is truly beautiful. In the room, filled with the smell of coffee and watercolors, there was a creative atmosphere. Emily was completely absorbed in creating a comic book, reflecting her life on paper. Lively. Juxtaposed with the black and white sketches, the colored drawings were like stills from an old movie. Here is little Emily with big eyes running barefoot on a green lawn, behind which spread golden fields of wheat. Nearby, a good-natured grandfather in a straw hat checks the beehives. and a grandmother with wrinkles around her eyes smiles as she looks at her granddaughter. And it was a graphic story of her own life, full of sunny summer days in the country, the smell of honey, and Grandma Barber's mysterious predictions. Emily, with fingertips stained with purple and blue paint, thoughtfully applied strokes, giving life to her little world drawn on paper. "Need to add some pink," the woman murmured. And this is where Emily enjoyed drawing the apiary. Grandpa Johnny is teaching her to distinguish between flower honey and buckwheat honey, and she keeps getting confused, too caught up in the golden color. In the memory of the young artist, one bright pictures popped up. The summer sun floods the meadows with golden light, the fragrance of blooming linden, honeycomb, full of sweet, thick nectar. And here on the next sketch, Johnny with a beard, looking like a furry dandelion, in a stretchy robe tells stories about the life of bees and how important it is to take care of nature. "Why are bees so hardworking?" little Emily asked then, looking at the insects swirling around the flowers. She still remembered the sticky honey dripping down her hands and her grandfather laughing as he wiped her face with a soft towel. And here, Barbara's easily recognizable profile appeared on a piece of paper. Emily depicted her grandmother as stern but kind, with an amber necklace and wrinkles around her eyes, like a map with ancient secrets. "Grandma, why do you always look at people's hands, the ones who come to see you?" Emily asked, climbing into her lap. "And because a person's fate is written on them," answered Granny, stroking her small palm. "Each line has its own story, its joys, its sorrows." Barbara knew almost everything about people, saw the future, read their destinies. Emily often sat next to her grandmother, mesmerized by her calmness and wisdom. "You're going to be an artist," Grandma said one day, gazing into the lines of Emily's palm. "You will create beauty, and people will rejoice in your creations." Childhood contained a warm gallery of bright sunny colors, and then Emily's life was filled with gray, rainy days. Mama Sarah was gone, leaving behind only emptiness and pain. Emily was just a little girl, only 5 years old, and didn't understand why her mom didn't smile anymore, and why her eyes were so sad after visiting her uncle's doctor at the district hospital. And then she disappeared, leaving only a kind memory in a grave mound with a cross in the local cemetery. "Mommy went to the stars in the sky," Grandma said, trying to explain the irreparable loss to Emily. "She became a stargazer, too, and now she's taking care of us." Remembering this, Emily drew a sad scene. The little girl standing looking up at the sky, bitter tears rolling down her cheeks. Then Daddy left, though not to heaven, but to another family, leaving Emily in the care of her grandparents. The little girl felt abandoned, unwanted. "Why doesn't Daddy love me?" Emily cried, huddled against her grandmother. "Why did he leave me?" "He just doesn't know how to love. Not all people are capable of real feelings," Barbara said quietly. And at the same moment, Emily pictured her father in the comic strip, walking away somewhere in the distance. Here was his figure growing smaller and smaller, and Emily herself standing with her head down, feeling alone, betrayed. "But I will love you always. You're the only ray of light in my life," Grandma whispered. Emily grew up, graduated from high school. Johnny's grandfather had died by then. A stroke took him away. Grandma was left alone, but nevertheless found the strength to go on living. Emily realized that she had to leave the village to find herself in the big city, to become independent. She went back to the comic book, drew herself as a student, diligently studying textbooks and preparing for exams, and then depicted standing in front of an easel with a brush in her hand, surrounded by bright colors. In the city, Emily went to university, chose the profession of artist decorator. She studied, worked, dreamed, and also created beauty, enlivened the walls of houses with her drawings. She depicted flowers, birds, different landscapes. All her works without exception were full of light and joy. "Emily, you are very talented," the professor told her. "You have golden hands." "Thank you, Arkady Petrovich," she answered, feeling her heart fill with warmth. "I just love my work." She continued to draw. On the next drawing depicted herself sitting in a cozy cafe with a cup of coffee. Next to her is an unfamiliar young man, dark-haired, handsome, smiling and looking at Emily with tenderness, Jason. There's no doubt in her mind that it's really him. They met in the park, where Emily was entertaining the kids by drawing with colored crayons on the pavement. A tall, slender guy approached her and smiled. "Your work is a marvel," Jason said. "You're a real magician." She was embarrassed, blushing. Emily had never heard such words before, much less from a young man. "Thank you. It's a pleasure." "May I meet you?" the guy asked. "My name is Jason." "And I'm Emily," the girl replied, feeling her heart start to beat faster. And next in the comic book, with a few strokes, she reproduced their first meeting. She had Jason looking at her with a gentle gaze and a smile. Flowers, sunshine, and joy all around them. "Emily, I love you," Jason said one day, holding her hand. "You are my life and my inspiration at the same time." Emily wasn't lazy and immediately drew the kiss and her smile on paper. The full happiness was on the scrapbook. There was also a place for her mother-in-law, whom the young artist depicted as a fire-breathing dragon. Only unlike the fairy tale character, Barbara did not generate flames at all, but waves of criticism and curses. Finally, Emily finished drawing, leaned back in her chair, and smiled. The story of her life, full of joy, sadness, love, and loss, was written on paper in bright, vibrant colors. The next morning she came again to Victoria's cottage, armed with paints, brushes, and finished sketches. The landlady greeted her as coldly as the first time. "I hope you can manage," Victoria said. "Don't worry, I'll be fine," Emily replied and began to work. The first few hours passed in silence. Victoria only appeared in the nursery to make sure the work was going according to plan. Emily tried to ignore the cold attitude and concentrated only on her work. Sometimes it seemed to her that she was depicting something deeper and more meaningful than just the sea. Toward evening, while working on a sketch of a sailing ship, Emily heard a child's voice behind her. "Auntie, what are you drawing?" Emily lowered her eyes and saw Johnny standing in the doorway, small, skinny, with big, sad eyes. "A sailboat," she answered and smiled. "It's beautiful," said Johnny. "Can you tell stories?" "Yes, I like to tell stories." The boy looked at her with interest. "Can you tell me two, or at least one?" Emily nodded in agreement, and sitting down on the floor, invited Johnny to join in. Then, after going over a few stories in her head, she began to talk about the sea, ships, and faraway lands. Johnny listened with bated breath. His eyes glistened with delight, and he had a sweet smile on his face. He asked questions and listened again. At some point, Emily felt a special connection between them. She also realized that the boy needed affection, attention, warmth. Emily was so engrossed in the conversation that she didn't even notice Victoria entering the room. The hostess had an angry expression on her face. "What's going on here? I don't understand. What are you doing? Entertaining my son or still work and fulfill your direct duties?" The young artist flinched in surprise and dropped the brush from her hands, which fell to the protective film-covered floor. The paint left small reddish stains on it. Sarah wrinkled her nose. "For this to be the first and last time, I need quality from you, not that you're going to come in here for a month and beat the cormorant," she said. "Okay, Sarah Alexeyevna, I'll do it all." Emily came to her senses and looked guiltily into the boy's eyes. Johnny lowered his nose and wandered into the other room that temporarily served as his nursery. Emily didn't know what reason Sarah had for being so cold to her son. And anyway, why didn't such a good boy have babysitters lingering around? In Emily's opinion, Johnny was a great kid and was only a little cranky for his age. Perhaps if Sarah had spent more time with him, he would have opened up to her like a delicate flower in the sunlight. But for some reason Sarah didn't, and looked at her son as if he were not of her blood, but some sort of servant. The end of the workday came out crumpled. The pleasure she'd gotten from talking to Johnny had been marred by a caustic remark from Sarah, who for some unknown reason had suddenly acted so aggressively. For a moment, it seemed to Emily that she was talking to two different people through email. Finished for the day, she closed the room and headed for the exit. "If you need an advance, take it from the desk," she tossed over her shoulder to Sarah, who had either decided to make up or was contemplating spurring her employee onto more action with money. "Thank you, Sarah Alexievna. But I have the money. That's better later, when I finish the whole work," Emily answered already in the doorway. In fact, the money was very much needed, especially given Barbara's constant nagging. But on the other hand, if Emily gave the deposit to her mother-in-law, where was the guarantee that tomorrow she would not again present her with new claims? After weighing the pros and cons, Emily mentally commended herself for not taking the deposit. Truth be told, she felt a certain anxiety about how Sarah would evaluate the final result of her work. Emily had already had a case when the customer had not paid anything. It was a small thing. Jason had offered to sort it out, to involve the right people, capable of extracting debts from anyone. But Emily hadn't wanted to, and deep down she'd been hurt by the customer's rejection, who hadn't appreciated her talent. With Jason still on a business trip, she didn't want to rush home. And what was waiting for her there? Barbara's disgruntled face, who'd been sitting at home all day, bored with the scandals, and just waiting for a chance to pick on her sister-in-law again. Deciding to go to the store and buy something tasty, Emily turned toward the nearest supermarket. It was crowded at that time, and the long lines at the checkout line suggested that Emily had come during rush hour. Emily didn't feel bad, though, and picked up her basket and began to browse the shelves of groceries. Suddenly her attention was caught by the security guard's shout. "What's all the fumbling about? Who let him in here? Get out of here. I know you. You drive your wheelchairs in here and then search you at the gatehouse." Emily turned around and saw an indignant man, about 35 years old in a wheelchair, looking sadly at the guard and trying to explain that he wasn't a thief, just going to buy bread and milk. "Yes, I know you. What bread do you want? You've probably come here for vodka. You've gotten so brazen lately that you've started drinking alcohol without leaving the store. But you have a drink and then put the bottle back. What am I supposed to do? Pay for the shortage out of my own pocket?" The guard insisted. The customers looked at the unhappy man with obvious displeasure and shook their heads. Some of them really thought that he was a vagrant who was trying to make everyone feel sorry for him, but in fact he was not disabled. But for some reason, Emily immediately sensed that this man really needed help. Approaching the guard, she gently touched him by the sleeve of his uniform jacket and said, "Excuse me, you can let this man through. I know him well. He's not a vagrant." The guard turned around and gave Emily a disgruntled look. "What? You know him just like that? Would you say he's your neighbor or work colleague?" Emily barely suppressed a smile and furtively winked at the stranger sitting in the wheelchair. "Yes, he is indeed my neighbor. He lives at 15 Oak Street. I declare with full responsibility he will not steal anything from the store. He is not a thief." The guard was visibly embarrassed as the situation prevented him from venting all his aggression on her. "But since you know him, then you watch him yourself. Keep in mind, if he steals something, you'll be the one to pay at the cash register. And then 3 times the amount, taking into account the fine," threw the guard in farewell and stepped aside, looking for a new victim with his eyes. "Thank you. That was very helpful. I'm really not a thief or a vagrant," the man began to justify himself, running his hands over the wheels of the stroller. Emily smiled. "Oh, come on, I get it. Those guards are just waiting for someone to take their anger out on. The pay isn't great. You're in uniform all day, looking for trespassers. And when you do it day in and day out, every customer seems like a criminal. And that's why all kinds of misunderstandings happen. Doctors call it professional burnout. The man looked at his new acquaintance with interest. Do you have anything to do with medicine? Emily shook her head. Actually, no, I'm an artist. But I've read books on psychology. I know a little about it. The man smiled, then said, I, on the other hand, have everything to do with medicine. Or rather, I did. My name is Michael Thompson. I'm a general practitioner by profession. I've had a lot in the past, a home, a family, a job. But that all changed after that accident in the mountains. The safety rope broke, and I plummeted into the abyss. Emily froze in place with surprise. So how did you get out of that gorge? Michael paused for a moment, as if tasting the words. Then he continued, still turning the wheels of the stroller toward the shelves of freshly baked goods. How did you get out? Well, it's a long story. Anyway, no one was looking for me. The rescuers refused because of the danger of an avalanche. So I crawled through snow and rocks for several days until I got to the river, and their fishermen picked me up. They called a rescue helicopter. Emily looked sadly at the spot where Michael's legs should have been. Only now did she notice that his injured limbs were orphaned by a woolen blanket, apparently so as not to shock anyone around him. Intercepting her gaze, he nodded understandingly. I was diagnosed with frostbite. I begged the doctors to save my legs. I am a doctor myself, a colleague, but it seems that it was not fate. Gangrene developed, and then blood poisoning began. The surgeon simply had no other choice. When I woke up, at first I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought it was a nightmare. I got out of bed twice and crawled to the window. I thought I'd kill myself. My wife immediately filed for divorce, and she was pregnant with my child. Only, as it turned out, Sarah got pregnant not by me, but by a rich businessman. So there was no point in my living then. Michael's story shocked Emily to the core. At that moment, she suddenly wanted to scream at the top of her voice at the fact that people around her were just passing by and not even noticing the man whose life was going downhill. I don't know what to say. Emily just stood there, looking into the eyes of this kind, slightly sad man. When I crawled to the window for the third time, the head of the ward couldn't stand it and called a priest, Father John, to see me. He came, told me what to do, showed me a new path in life. Anyway, I changed my mind about throwing myself out the window. I started working as a dispatcher at an ambulance station. I don't know anything else but my medicine. You can't change that. I'm raising money for new dentures. My salary's small, but I save every dime, save on clothes. And the guards take me for a vagrant, thinking that I came here for a drink, John explained. At that moment, Emily looked at her new acquaintance with different eyes. Then, on a mental impulse, she suddenly took a fresh loaf from the shelf and added a couple bottles of milk to it. Here you go, please. My name's Emily. I come here a lot, so I guess I'll see you around. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get home. John nodded understandingly, but he still refused the food. It was awkward. All the way back, Emily thought about the vicissitudes of fate that had turned the doctor's life upside down. And at home she was again waiting for a scandal, started, of course, by her mother-in-law, who did not like the fact that her daughter-in-law came a little later than usual, causing her a storm of indignation. Oh, look, if I find out you're hanging around with men, I'll call Jason and tell him all about it. Where have you been for so long? You were here earlier yesterday, but what about today? What changed? Or are you looking for a lover? While my Jason's making money, he's making sure you have everything you need. Emily's cheeks flushed with shame. Her mother-in-law's remark had struck at the heart of the matter. How could she reproach her for coming home half an hour later than yesterday? Barbara, you must have misunderstood me, I explained. I'm going to have a full day of work today, Emily began with difficulty pulling herself together. But it had no effect. The mother-in-law again began to argue that her daughter-in-law did not love her son and only waited for the opportunity to go to the left. Thus, the evening altercation led to the fact that Emily, as well as yesterday, closed herself in her room, trying to ignore the angry remarks of her mother-in-law. She picked up her smartphone, brushed away a tear, and tried to dial Jason's number. But as usual, he was silent. The indifferent voice of the cellular network operator informed her that the subscriber was out of range. There goes the phone off again. What kind of conversations can there be at this hour? Emily thought sadly and put the smartphone away on the nightstand. The mood had soured again. Deciding to go to bed early, she had a hasty snack and went to the bathroom. Barbara was already sitting at the TV, commenting on another soap opera. The night passed relatively quietly, except for a dream inspired by the former doctor's stories. For some inexplicable reason, she dreamed of mountains and dangerous climbing to the very top, where every brave man was waiting for respect and honor. In the morning, tired of the intrusive visions, Emily got up, and to pass the time, began to draw another sketch of the future work, deciding not to wait for her mother-in-law to rise. Emily left the house an hour early to get a cup of coffee on her way to work and headed to Sarah's house. What was her surprise when outside the store she spotted John again, eagerly riding his stroller back and forth like a teenager on his first date. When he saw Emily, he was excited. He moved closer, and a second later a long-stemmed rose appeared in his hand, as if by magic. Its soft pink petals fluttered in the wind, making Emily freeze in place. The last time she'd been given flowers had been 5 years ago, the day Jason had decided to propose, and had splurged on 3 white roses, which Barbara had remembered long afterward, when she talked about spending too much on floral brooms. "Thank you, John. It's a pleasure," Emily said with a smile, accepting the flower from him. "You're welcome. I thought I'd thank you for your help yesterday. I mean, if it wasn't for you, that security guard would have thrown me down the steps. Or the police, for that matter," John explained. Emily's mood lifted, the birds sang, and she wanted to float in the clouds like a fairy. And all thanks to the one flower that had chosen to show its appreciation. Ben walked her to the bus stop and waved goodbye, promising to meet her after work. At the same time, Emily caught herself thinking that a man with disabilities took better care of her than her husband, a businessman who had no time due to his constant business with business projects. To the young artist's surprise, the door was opened today by Johnny. "Where's Mom? Careful?" Emily inquired. The boy shrugged, then mumbled something unintelligible about his mom not feeling well after last night's trip to the restaurant. Emily frowned. Honestly, she would have given a lot not to hear the boy's words and not get into the details of Sarah's personal life. Only now did she realize how right Johnny's former nanny had been when she'd said the mother didn't care about her son at all. "Would you like me to tell you a story while Mommy sleeps?" Emily suggested, furtively looking around. The boy smiled, sure. "And anyway, she's not my mom. She's my stepmom. Dad said Mom died when I wasn't even a year old, and then he brought Sarah in afterward." Emily went pale. "So that's your stepmother. I thought you and her were related." Johnny waved his hand. "No, that's probably why she doesn't like me. And my dad died in an accident. Something happened to his tire while he was driving full throttle. Sarah's been taking care of me ever since. I don't like it, but what can you do? That's why I have to do weird stuff to get attention. Maybe someone will help me and take me to an orphanage away from Aunt Sarah." The little one's confession caused a storm of emotion in her soul. After all, how could she have known that Sarah would turn out not to be Johnny's own? But the worst thing was not even that, but the fact that according to the boy, Sarah took full advantage of his late father's money and acted as if she were a rich heiress, not the guardian of an orphan boy. As she told Johnny another tale, Emily thought about how she could help him get rid of his stepmother's oppression. But Emily didn't have time to finish the story because the smartphone in her purse began to alert her to incoming calls. Since Johnny was closer, he didn't hesitate to hand Emily the smartphone. As he looked at the caller's picture, what the boy saw made him uncomfortable, and he instinctively recoiled, still not understanding his reaction. Emily picked up the phone and saw Jason's face on the screen. Her husband was calling her from business trip via video link. "What are you doing?" "Another fiddling on the walls, I see," her husband asked in his usual mocking tone. "I've been looking for a new job," Emily said with restraint, trying to ignore the mockery. Jason nodded understandingly, then continued, "I'm in negotiations again, so I'm going to be late. I probably won't be home tonight. At least I'll be gone for a couple more days. The foreign investors let me down. They didn't come to the meeting. Something happened on their flight. I think they canceled it. You'd think that would make me feel better." Emily frowned visibly. Once again, she would have to spend the evening alone with her mother-in-law, muttering to herself, as if she were looking for another victim at nightfall. After talking to her husband some more, she wanted to wish him well and send him a kiss, but then the phone rang. She sighed sadly and put the phone away in her purse. At that moment, she shifted her gaze to Johnny and saw that the boy was looking at her with a tinge of worry in his face. "Is something wrong, Johnny?" she asked cautiously. The boy was visibly embarrassed, as if he didn't know whether he could tell this kind aunt the truth or whether it would be better to keep silent for the time being. But then the desire to do something good was stronger, and Johnny said quietly, "You'll forgive me, of course, but I've already seen that uncle from your telephone. He comes to see my stepmother a lot, and then they go to a restaurant or something." Emily nearly choked with surprise. "Are you sure about that?" "Maybe you're wrong." Johnny shook his head negatively. "No, I'm not wrong. I even know his name. Jason. His stepmother is always waiting for him to come, trying to cook something delicious. And on normal days, she never does that and orders food delivery." Emily's lips quivered, a cold sweat appearing on her forehead. "God, what is this? My husband has been lying to me all this time," Jennifer thought, desperately holding back from crying in front of her child. But her world was crumbling like a house of cards. She felt helpless. The world, previously bright, suddenly seemed black and white, dull, lifeless. Everything inside her shrank with pain. Emily remembered how she'd met Jason, how her future husband had looked at her with adoration. She'd been naive, believing, trusting, loving. Now it was all crumbling under the onslaught of doubt and heartache. Taking her cell phone, she left Sarah's house and dialed her husband's number. Work no longer mattered to her. The beeps seemed endless, as if playing on her strained nerves. "Jason, it's me, Emily." "Amy, what did you want?" "I thought we talked about everything," her husband replied. There was a detachment in his voice, as if he were talking to a coworker rather than his beloved wife. "I need to talk to you," Emily replied, barely holding back tears. "I'm busy. I'll call you back later." "No, Jason, I can't wait any longer," Emily retorted. A lump stuck in her throat and she swallowed convulsively, trying to speak evenly. "I know you're cheating on me." A heavy, tense silence hung. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. "Are you out of your mind?" was all Jason could say confusedly. "It doesn't matter," Emily replied. "I can't and don't want to live a lie anymore." "Amy, please don't be silly," the spouse began to justify himself. "It's not at all what you think it is." "No," Emily interrupted him. "I'm filing for divorce." Another pause hung in the receiver, more tense than the previous one. "Emily, stop it," Jason exclaimed. "It's already clear. You've been deceiving me deftly. All this time I've been giving you all of myself. A fine actor. Goodbye." Having said this, Emily passed out. The tears she had held back for so long came in floods. She fell to the lawn, wrapping her arms around her knees. She'd loved Jason, believed in their feelings, imagined them growing old together. Now her world had crumbled. How could she have been so blind? Why hadn't she noticed the signals her unfaithful spouse was giving her? Turning around, she spotted Johnny watching her from the window with his hands pressed to his chest. She smiled and waved goodbye. Emily knew she would be back, not for the money, but for the baby who had fallen under oppression of a greedy stepmother. And Emily did not go home that evening, confining herself to a cheap hotel room. Barbara was raving and literally exuding venom, even through the speaker of her smartphone. But Emily didn't listen to her, thinking only of how to teach Jason and Sarah a lesson for treating her so cruelly. But when she went to her email account, she felt bad. Turns out she had gotten the wrong address, and instead of a customer, she had gone to a completely different client. Emily assumed that the artist had been sent by the foreman who was renovating her house. If only she could have known that fate would send her straight to her husband's mistress. The next morning, having blacklisted her husband and mother-in-law, Emily went to a lawyer specializing in family law and filed for divorce. At the same time, she wrote an appeal to the Board of Guardianship to check Johnny's stepmother and deprive her of all custody rights. But a major surprise awaited Emily up ahead. When the guardianship officer sent a committee to Sarah to investigate, it turned out that Johnny's birth father was Ben Thompson, the same doctor who had lost his legs years before. His unfaithful wife left to the businessman, already being pregnant from the legitimate spouse. Only this fact the woman concealed, although in the birth certificate of Johnny was listed exactly Ben. In fact, the young doctor did not suffer from infertility. There was a mistake at the testing center. Did Ben's wife know that? It remains a mystery. After all, Kate began cheating on her husband a few months before the accident in the mountains. Kate Thompson later died of pneumonia. And Johnny's adoptive father, Daniel, whom the boy considered his own by ignorance, brought stepmother Sarah into the house. The news of his son's discovery sounded like thunder to Ben. The former doctor cried and without further ado hugged Emily, whose appeal to the Board of Guardianship allowed to reveal the secret of birth. "Johnny is my son, Lord. I have a son, my blood," Ben whispered, happy to have a ray of light in his life. Emily smiled, genuinely happy that she had unknowingly helped the father to find his son and the baby to find his father. The divorce had been almost painless for her. Jason could not prove his alleged right in court and lost half of the property acquired in marriage with Emily. His mistress Sarah, on the other hand, was even more unlucky, especially after the Social Security staff deprived her of custody rights, and with it, and $100,000 stored in the bank accounts of Johnny's late adoptive father. As it turned out, Jason, with the approval of his mistress, also managed to run his hands into the assets of the young heir, thus finding for himself a real gold mine. But everything comes to an end. Having found a son, Ben first time literally flew on wings of happiness. And when he took his first step on his new mechanical prostheses bought by Johnny, he felt an inexplicable surge of strength. Hugging Emily, Ben promised her to return to medicine and become a doctor again, despite everyone. Emily smiled back, and then, to Johnny's cheers, picked up a pencil and drew a new scene from her graphic comic book about life. There she stood again in her wedding dress, along with a tall man limping along, and a boy in whose eyes she could read the joy at the sight of Mommy and Daddy getting married. Bitter. Emily carefully penciled in and kissed Ben. Then she went to pick out her wedding dress.
Kristen ran home, opened the door, and found herself in the dark silence of the hallway. She realized with secret relief that it seemed like no one was home, which meant she would have time to cook dinner. As usual, Throwing her bag on the nightstand, she kicked off her shoes and moved towards the kitchen. But before reaching it, she suddenly stopped, waved her hand, and abruptly changing direction, entered the room. She sat down on the sofa, leaned back, and closed her eyes with pleasure. How good it is to just sit down and do nothing for at least a while. Kristen suddenly clearly realized how tired she was. This was not the kind of fatigue that any person experiences after a hard day of work, some task requiring physical exertion, or, for example, after a sleepless night. Kristen's fatigue was somehow endless, hopeless, overwhelming. And if she could get rid of the first one by simply resting and speaking out, then it was still unclear what she should do with her feelings. Her whole life in the last few years had been like an endless race in a circle. Housework, work, Andrew, child. In general, everything was familiar, ordinary, like everyone else. Millions of women live in exactly the same way, but no one considers this something special, does not lament the injustice in women's lot, or complains about fate. Take, for example, her best, in fact, if you look at it, her only friend since school. Her position is the head of the legal department of a huge commercial company, with a bunch of people subordinate to her. Of course, the salary is more than decent, but the responsibility is scary to think about. And not only for yourself, but also for others. By the way, there are 3 children and a husband. Or, as Helen jokingly calls him, my eldest child, hinting at some immaturity of her dear person. At home, Helen fundamentally does everything herself, although it is unclear when and how she gets everything done, given the size of their apartment, the presence in it of 3 teenagers, a large dog, and a scientist husband, a man, to put it mildly, not practical. How, despite all this, she managed to maintain her blooming appearance and cheerful disposition from year to year was a huge mystery to everyone. For everyone except Lena, who, flashing a smile, told Kristen, I've been telling you the same thing for many years, you need to love and respect yourself. Understand, Kristen brushed aside her friend's words, considering it a hackneyed and meaningless phrase. She believed that she certainly respected herself. Just how can this feeling help her to do everything, and most importantly, to feel as easy and calm, to be as humanly happy as the same Helen? She didn't understand. Well, from tomorrow a completely different life begins. And she herself, Kristen, a 33-year-old woman who just a few years ago, no one had ever given her age, and now looking 50 years old, will never be the same. She will be fine. Kristen was raised by her mother. The girl did not remember her father. As her mother, whose name was Anne, later told her, he fell ill and died suddenly when Kristen was not yet 2 years old. Life turned out so that they had no one else in the world except each other. Mom, having buried her husband, did not even try to arrange her personal life anymore and devoted herself entirely to her daughter. Her whole life and every moment of it were devoted to the child. The girl's health from birth was poor. She was frankly behind her peers in height and energy. She was often sick, and Anne spent her first few years in constant fear that something terrible and irreparable was about to happen to her daughter. Mother, you cannot do it this way. An elderly pediatrician who had been observing Kristen since birth ironically reprimanded her. You will go crazy before your Kristen goes to school. For example, now a girl has a common cold, and you are panicking. As if we have identified a terrible infection in your child. Having matured a little, Kristen became stronger and almost caught up with the children of her age. And yet she still remained fragile, touching, and defenseless. She spoke little, and almost always kept her head slightly lowered. And her favorite pastime from early childhood was drawing. Anna had no education other than school. She worked as a cloakroom attendant in the city theater, and of course their family did not have much money left. While Kristen was little, this did not affect her life in any way. On the contrary, she considered her mother's work to be the best, because the girl could watch all the performances for free. And the New Year holidays with successive children's performances, which she watched one after another, not paying attention to the repeating plots of the same characters, generally turned into a continuous holiday for her. What is unimportant and invisible to a baby looks completely different to a teenager. Growing up, Kristen, of course, could not help but notice that she was the worst in the class. She was poorly dressed. She had the oldest briefcase, a gift from one of the neighbors. And in physical education class, she wore the funniest sneakers, the kind you can only see in old photographs, and not sneakers like everyone else. She watched in amazement as her classmates defiantly threw money out of their pockets in front of each other, showed off their belongings, and discussed family trips to seaside resorts, and the upcoming holidays. Despite this, it never occurred to Kristen to blame her mother for anything. She saw that she was doing everything she could for her daughter. She just could do very little. Her health failed her at times. Small, thin, she, giving her growing daughter an extra, sweeter piece, lived practically from hand to mouth, and from year to year wore the same drafty coat and boots, the soles of which had long lead in everything they stepped on. And what only the soul holds on to. So skinny. The neighbors shook their heads, watching Anne as she always hurried somewhere. But what Kristen understood and patiently endured, her peers could not understand and tolerate. With the harshness and cruelty characteristic of many teenagers, they hurled vile words in her direction, at first in a whisper, not really understanding the inadmissibility of this. But with age they did it more and more consciously. At the beginning of the next school year, the class in which Kristen studied was supposed to go on an excursion to a neighboring city. The guys were, of course, excited about the upcoming trip and heatedly discussed it and made plans. One of the points of the program was a visit to the opera and ballet theater famous throughout the country. Kristen, who has loved theatrical performances since childhood, was looking forward to this particular event with special interest and already knew the theater's repertoire and the schedule of performances by heart. We should go to this theater, discussed the guys, who for the most part were not delighted with the attempts to introduce them to high art. It would be better if we went to the zoo. What is there to even see? Who knows what we will watch? Carmen Kristen suddenly announced with unusual excitement. Her voice sounded unexpectedly loud, and everyone turned in her direction. Are you planning to go too? Suddenly Kristen asked the most beautiful, by everyone's own opinion, girl in the class, Sarah. Kristen looked around hauntedly and felt her ears begin to burn. Ugh. You will disgrace us in front of everyone, said Sarah. I can imagine what you will wear to the theater. Probably in that terrible sundress, knitted, with flowers, which you wore on March 8th. By the way, if you think this is festive clothing, then I want to disappoint you. This is clothing for a stuffed animal. Why did you go and take off that sundress from him? Kristen felt tears boiling in her eyes. She lowered her head low, and a warm drop fell on her hand. You better shut up, princess. Suddenly a ringing voice was heard in the class, which easily drowned out the disgusting sycophantic giggles of the children. Otherwise, you yourself won't be able to go anywhere, because I will spank you. You will sit at home and change lotions on your black eye. Understood? Kristen wiped her eyes and raised her head in front of Lyra. With her fists on her sides, stood a girl named Helen. Everyone knew better than to mess with her. Not only has she been seriously involved in some type of martial arts for a long time and can easily beat not only Sarah, but also any of the boys, but she also has a brother, Victor, who studies in high school. And everyone again knows that Victor is the guy is athletic, serious and authoritative. What are you doing? Sarah asked in amazement. Are you standing up for this scarecrow? You yourself, scarecrow, she retorted. And in general, if anyone comes to her again or says something nasty, they will have to deal with me, okay? Thank you, Kristen said quietly, getting closer to her unexpected intercessor at the next break. What? Helen asked. What are you muttering there? I don't understand. And anyway, why do you always talk as if you're going to die? I'm saying. Kristen took a deep breath and spoke louder. Thank you for helping me. Oh, nonsense, Helen waved it off. Sarah should have been put in her place a long time ago. My mistress too. She became completely insolent. Yes, and it's your own fault. Why are you silent? You always endure like some kind of sheep. Do you like being insulted? And anyway, why are you some kind of orphan? And I am an orphan. Kristen laughed quietly. Well, that is half. I only have my mother. Oh, excuse me, please, Kristen. Helen was confused. I haven't paid attention to such little things for a long time. Well, anyway, thank you again for standing up for me. Kristen nodded and turned to leave and sit at the last desk, where she almost always sat alone. Hey, you wait. Helen moved decisively after her. Come on, you will sit with me now. Like this? Kristen was confused. But Oleg is sitting with you. Just think, Oleg is sitting. It's okay. It means he'll change seats. Oleg, Helen barked at the whole class, turning to one of her classmates. Quickly pull yourself together and go to the last desk. Her eyesight is poor. She needs to sit closer to the board. From that day on, Kristen's life, at least at school, changed dramatically. She no longer felt like an outcast, and people began to greet her. At first, stuttering, forced, with an eye on the omnipresent Helen, and then simply and habitually, because this is normal. Kristen has become a much better student. It turned out that she has an excellent memory. But the most important thing is that everyone learned about her talent. To the first secret, and then obvious admiration of her class, it turned out that she draws incredibly well. Kristen has even changed in appearance for the better. She stopped clenching herself as she had done before, as if trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. And then, to everyone's amazement, it turned out that Kristen was actually very good at something. Anna inherited from her mother fragility, grace, good, thick, slightly curly hair, dark brown, slightly red, long eyelashes, and beautiful, even white teeth, which everyone finally saw after their owner began to smile. All this became very noticeable in high school. Ellen never gave up on anything halfway, and having taken a kind of patronage over Kristen, she did not limit herself to forcing the class to accept Kristen and begin to treat her normally. A few days after the memorable conversation, she dragged her new friend to her home. Then she introduced her classmate to her parent. "Mom, let's give her my jeans." "Well, those that didn't bother me after the summer." "Well, maybe there's more." Her mother, looking at her compassionate child with a smile, turned her eyes to thin Kristen. She knew the girl, of course. "I heard about her difficult fate and the cheerful life of her small family." "Yes, please, I don't mind," she nodded. "But if Kristen herself doesn't mind, of course, bring the jeans. And remember, if you don't stop eating so much bread, you'll soon be able to give Kristen all your clothes." "Come on," Kristen Helen mumbled, thrusting almost new pants into Kristen's hands. "They're just lying there anyway. And what do you give me for this?" "Well, I don't know, I came up with an idea. You will draw my portrait." By her senior year, things were looking up for Kristen. Helen's efforts and care showed, and Kristen herself became a completely different person. Soon, the highlight of the school exhibition were ironic drawings and cartoons by Kristen, in which the children recognized themselves and each other with delight and amazement. After this, Kristen became, if not a star, then at least a person whose unconditional abilities were recognized by everyone at school. In addition, she is the class beauty of the class. Kristen's longtime follower, Sarah, suddenly became covered with teenage acne, and Kristen, on the contrary, blossomed with some special, subtle, translucent girlish beauty that not everyone notices, but which cannot be forgotten once you see it. After graduating from school, Kristen entered art school. The girl had no prior preparation. However, during the creative exam, Kristen, fulfilling the examiner's assignment, really shined and was accepted. "You are very gifted," one of the admissions committee members told her. "You have an amazing innate sense of composition and color. But you have poor technical skills and are not at all prepared in terms of theory. You need to work a lot and read in your specialty, dear girl. Well, for example, let's take this portrait from your portfolio. It is, of course, very interesting in the manner of execution, but at the same time it contains a lot of mistakes. Well, look," the teacher launched into long, lengthy analyses of her work. "By the way, a portrait of Lena." And Kristen listened to her work with delight. "How can he even judge my portrait if he has never seen me? The portrait is awesome. Everyone says this, see, it looks like me. Well, just like a photograph, only 100 times better. I've never looked good in photos, but here it's so great." Helen, he wasn't talking about the similarity, but about technical errors. But, you know, the composition itself, proportions, light and shade, plasticity. "Oh, okay, don't bother me with all this. I still won't understand anything. You draw just great." Kristen enjoyed studying at school and drew every free minute of her life. Helen, with her characteristic practicality, declared that not everyone can be great creators. Someone needs to earn money, and she entered the university to study law. The girls, of course, saw each other much less frequently than when they were at school, but they still constantly maintained friendly relations. Kristen felt more than just gratitude towards Helen for the fact that her friend had once, in fact, completely changed her life. She saw Helen as an older sister, and the latter, on the contrary, having taken part in the fate of a school outcast several years ago, was sincerely proud of her friend and perceived her as the younger sister she never had. Things were going very well for Kristen at school. She was really talented. Her work was noted as one of the best. And after a couple of years, they started talking about her as a young artist with her own style. "You see, girl," the elderly teacher who was their course leader explained to her with inspiration, An artist is not someone who can draw a cat or a tree exactly as it looks in reality or in a photograph. This is not an artist. This is a copying machine. And an artist is someone who lives in his own world and knows how to show this world to others with light, form, and strokes. Here you have it, this sketch, for example. God knows how you managed to make me see an old man here. Kristen laughed along with the teacher and meticulously looked at the sheet from which, framed by gray hair swaying in the wind, the prickly, stern gaze of a wise elderly man peered into her. Time fled, and my studies at the school quickly ended. She received a diploma as an artist teacher, and with it a complete lack of understanding of what to do next. At the graduation ceremony, the rector told her, "Well, you are perhaps one of our most talented students in recent times. But unfortunately, in modern times, this is not enough. You need opportunities, time, a workshop, tools, materials. Yes, in general, to become an artist, you need money, no matter how bad it may sound. And to become a great artist, you need a lot of money." The man paused and sighed heavily. "Still, I wish you success. Maybe not now, later, someday, but your gift certainly deserves it." Hearing this was both pleasant and scary at the same time. But Kristen didn't want to think about her fate yet. She was young, beautiful, happy, and all the thoughts of her and her former classmates were occupied with their graduation evening. They decided to celebrate their graduation at the highest level, in a fashionable nightclub. Mom gave her daughter silver earrings. They were made in the form of the thinnest leaves, which intertwined with each other and ended in an elegant flower with a small diamond in the center. Mom, what a miracle. Kristen took a long time to come to her senses and didn't even realize right away. "How are you? Where did you get the money?" Anne finished asking her daughter. "Well, honey, your mother is not such a loser that she couldn't save up for a gift for her only girl." Kristen's nose stung and her eyes itched. And then Kristen put on her dress, prepared for going out to the club, and now it was Anne's turn to sigh in admiration and wipe her eyes. Only she did it without hiding, and without hiding her happy tears. The dress was extraordinary, very simple, straight, with almost no details. It was made of elastic, but at the same time dense fabric. The dress fit her figure like a glove, creating a silhouette of incredible beauty and femininity. The rather deep cutout on the back was absolutely breathtaking. The color of the fabric was in great harmony with the loose, light chestnut curls, and the light, barely noticeable makeup only emphasized the calm, somehow unusual, as if a little not modern, and this made it even more attractive, beauty of the girl. When Kristen appeared among her classmates, everyone simply gasped. She read undisguised admiration in the guy's eyes. But many girls looked at her with poorly concealed envy. All these sensations were completely unusual for Kristen, and made her head spin no less than the light wine that the waiter periodically poured into her. The party was in full swing. The music and conversations became louder, faces became hotter, and the behavior of those around them became freer. Many of the guys went dancing, and Kristen, who had never been to this kind of place before, watched with curiosity what was happening on the dance floor. "Can I bother you?" She heard a man's voice above her. Kristen raised her head. A young man stood in front of her. With the tenacious gaze of an artist, she instantly took in all the details, noted the harmonious facial features, figure, neatly styled blonde hair, and most importantly, incredibly beautiful hands with long fingers and surprisingly graceful wrists for a man. She immediately drew attention to his hands, because the man was holding in them an amazingly beautiful, blooming rose on a long stem. How beautiful, the girl burst out completely involuntarily. "It is for you." He handed her a flower, a beautiful rose for the most beautiful girl in the club. "Well, why are you embarrassed, Kristen?" "No need. After all, it turns out that I begged her from you. How can I put it?" It turns out he laughed cheerfully. "Although no, of course I brought it just for you as a bribe." "Bribery?" she asked again incomprehensibly. "Yes, bribery." The guy smiled. His smile was extremely charming. I immediately wanted to smile back. I just thought that if I tried to give you a flower and you accepted it, it would be awkward for you to refuse me the dance. "I'll take the rose from you, but I still won't go dancing." "But why?" He looked really and truly upset. "You don't like me at all." "Not at all, not a bit. And you can't even stand me for one dance?" "No, why? You are very pretty." "I just don't know how to dance at all." "Well, not a bit. Moreover." The conversation that took place between them under the roar of club music was, of course, a simple and light track, without any pretensions to content. It was a non-binding conversation between a guy and a girl. They were a little inspired by the atmosphere, music, drinking, youth, and freedom. Kristen, for the first time feeling so liberated about her attractiveness and femininity, the power of all this over men, did not recognize herself at all. It seemed that there were no barriers, no conventions, no obligations, nothing that would prevent her from cheerfully chatting about anything with this terribly handsome guy. Saying words that a few hours ago she would have been embarrassed to even think. "I can't do that either," the guy waved his hand. "You know, there's another establishment not far from here. It's very decent. It has a completely different atmosphere and wonderful live music. Perhaps you would agree to continue the evening there? I invite you, please do not refuse. You know, today is my birthday. It so happened that I was left alone. If you would agree to sit with me for a while, it would be the best gift for me. Please." He folded his hands in some kind of prayerful gesture, and Kristen once again involuntarily noted their grace. She looked around uncertainly. Many of the former students were already pretty tipsy. Until recently, the funny crowd had broken up into couples and groups, and one could be sure that hardly anyone would notice its disappearance. She looked again at her new acquaintance. He was so attractive, dressed in a white shirt, black trousers, and a formal jacket. He stood out among the drunken denim crowd, like a noble hare among mules. But most importantly, he looked at her with such admiration, and this look excited her so much that her legs lifted Kristen from the table. "Well, even though I don't understand what's going on and why I'm behaving this way, I agree," she said. "Thank you." The guy's eyes darkened. He gallantly pulled his hand away and offered it to Kristen. "Oh, wait." She suddenly stopped and laughed. "What is this, really? I'm almost ready to go with you to God knows where, and I don't even know your name." "Sorry, it's my fault. I lost my head." He smiled sweetly and spread his arms, bowing playfully. "Let me introduce myself, Andrew." "Kristen." She curtsied. "Well, everyone, it seems like all the formalities have been completed. Let's go." He suddenly took her hand and quickly, as if fearing that they would be stopped, walked towards the exit. They were sitting in a small, cozy restaurant, which, after the roar and hustle and bustle of the club, felt unusually good. A wonderful tea rose stood in a vase with water. Kristen looked over the flower at Andrew, and she wanted this night to never end. "You promised me a dance," he suddenly said and extended his hand. "And you promised to teach me how to dance," she answered. His hand lay softly and tenderly on her waist. She put her hands on his shoulders and felt happy. Apparently, he sensed the moment and gently pulled her towards him. She took a deep breath. "You know, I have to go." Kristen literally forced herself to say these words. "Why did I somehow offend you?" He tried to look into the girl's eyes. No, what are you talking about?" Everything was amazing. It was a wonderful evening, maybe the best of my life. But it's already very late. But I will see you again. He persistently tried to catch her eye. "I don't know, I'm not sure if this is necessary. Maybe it's not worth it. Just let everything remain as it is. Andrew, you are a wonderful guy. I had a very good time with you today. Happy birthday." Kristen stood on her tiptoes and kissed him on the cheek. She approached the exit but could not stand it and turned around. Andrew sat at the table, looking after her in confusion. She laughed joyfully, returned, and stroked his hair. "Write down my phone number." It was incredibly easy for her. Everything seemed simple and natural. For the first time in her life, she simply did what she wanted, without thinking about how right or decent it was. They started meeting every day. They walked around the city, sat on benches in the park, rowed a boat on the old pond, ate cakes in small summer cafes. "We're going to a restaurant this evening," he suddenly declared. "You should wear that amazing dress you wore to your prom." "Why is that?" Kristen was surprised. "Because today is our anniversary. It's been exactly a week since we met," Andrew solemnly announced. At first she laughed, but then realized that he was completely serious. And again there was a beautiful rose in a crystal glass, light wine and a gentle melody, Andrew's hands on her back and shoulders. "I was wrong when I told you that you were the most beautiful girl in the club," he whispered. That is, she was amazed, despite the bliss that overwhelmed her. "Are you trying to say that I'm not that good?" "I just want to say that you are the most beautiful girl in the world." What woman doesn't want to hear such words? Who among them can stand against them? They spent the night together. In a small but cozy apartment, Andrew. She woke up first and lay there for a long time, not believing what happened to her, trying to realize herself a completely new, different, alien, unfamiliar woman. Andrew was sleeping soundly, and Kristen was looking at him, afraid to move and frighten away the feeling of peace and happiness that covered her in a warm wave. He was lying on the edge of the bed, turned on his side. A dark lock of hair covered his face and hung over the edge of the sofa. He put his other hand under his cheek, and his long fingers tangled in his hair. Kristen quietly made her way to get the album and pencil that were always in her bag. Taking them and trying not to make noise, she sat down in a chair. The drawing appeared on the paper easily and quickly, but still she was not finished yet. Andrew stirred and opened his eyes. "What are you doing?" he said, seeing her concentrated face. "I'm drawing the most beautiful fingers I've ever seen." Kristen smiled. "Fingers?" Andrew asked in amazement and jumped up from the sofa and approached the girl. "What other fingers? Come on, show me. Why fingers? Is this the only thing attractive about me?" "You have very beautiful hands." "No, really. I noticed it immediately as soon as I saw you for the first time there, in the club." "Come on, stop it, you'll say the same." "I have stupid hands, small like a girl's. Mom says that such hands are a shame for a man. Although everything about you really seems beautiful. Damn, this is just great. You are a real artist. Let me kiss you urgently for this. Come on, look at me." Helen, whom Kristen had not seen for several weeks, and looked at her friend with surprise. "Listen, what's wrong with you? You're just glowing." "Kristen, admit it, what's going on? Fell in love or what?" Helen said the last phrase just like that, without thinking, and froze when she saw Kristen nodding vigorously, her eyes shining in her smile. "Wow," Helen said slowly. "Are you with a man? I thought this would never happen. So what, he's one of your crazy ones? Shady artist. Will you eat one briquette of instant noodles a day for 2 and draw imperishable masterpieces?" "No," Kristen laughed. "He's not one of us. He's completely different. Wonderful, gentle, smart. In general, it's clear. The best." A friend finished for her. "And when will I be introduced to this miracle of miracles? I just really want to look at the prince. You know, in recent years I have been seeing horses more and more." By this time, Helen had been married to her classmate for 3 years and was raising little sons, twins. She and her husband truly loved each other. The sons, of course, were adored. The phrase about horses was most likely intended to emphasize the heroic build of her men. Soon Helen and Andrew met. He was polite, reserved, and seemed a little afraid. She carefully probed him with her gaze and her trademark irony. "Well, what can I tell you?" Helen hugged her friend by the shoulders and looked into her eyes. "You love him. It's obvious, and you're happy. Here he is. You know, it seemed to me." "Oh, okay, everything will be fine. I am so happy for you." Summer was ending. The best summer in Kristen's life was spent with her loved one. Kristen went to work at an art school and began teaching drawing to children of all ages. The business was, of course, not entirely profitable, but it brought Kristen a lot of pleasure. Every day, ideas for future paintings of my own raced through my head, and my folders were swelling with sketches. Mom looked in surprise at her daughter, who was either singing songs desperately and out of tune, or spinning around the room like a little girl, and sometimes she was just sitting on a small loggia, raising her face to the soft autumn sun, smiling happily. One September evening, Andrew came in looking somewhat excited. It took Kristen a long time to gain control of his spirit, his words, and finally spoke. "Kristen, in general, I told my family about you. You probably remember, I told you I was not born here, I'm from." He said the name of a large village 50 kilometers from the city. "I have a large family, father, mother, grandfather, 2 uncles, 3 aunts. And this, mind you, I'm not talking about their wives and husbands." Despite the tension, Andrew suddenly laughed, obviously imagining his numerous relatives. "I also have 2 sisters and a younger brother. I have never counted my cousins, but there are even more of them. In general, I'm from a camp," he joked, having finished listing family members. Kristen listened with amazement about the family. She had no one in the world except her mother, and she simply could not imagine what it was like to have so many relatives. "Listen, "You are a happy person," she said, "to have so many relatives who love you. Well, they want to get to know you, you know? And I promised that we would come next Saturday. But I have to warn you, my mother. Well, how can I explain it to you? She is so very domineering. She loves everything to be the way she wants. Well, she was very surprised when I told about the fact that we are together, that you and I have a relationship. And she, of course, has a lot of questions at once, both about you and in general, Understand. It seems Kristen smiled cheerfully, although inside, to be honest, everything was shaking. And most likely, I am not at all the option that she wants for you. Well, what does this have to do with it? Andrew exclaimed. Whether Mom wants it or not, it doesn't matter. Well, or rather not really. Of course it doesn't. He was completely confused in his explanations, became confused, fell silent and looked pitifully at Kristen. Okay, I understand everything. Well, in fact, I understand perfectly well that I am not the most enviable option. Any mother in your place would not be very happy with such a girl for her son. If I were your mother, I wouldn't even let someone like me on the threshold. Kristen laughed, trying to make fun of Andrew's excitement and her own fear of meeting his family. Finally, the day appointed for the trip arrived. Kristen brought herself to an extreme state of anxiety with anticipation and did not sleep all night the night before she was tormented by the question how to dress. Do I need to wear makeup and do my hair? What will they think if she appears, so to speak, in a simple way? He'll say he doesn't respect us at all, so he needs to be on parade. What if they think she came to show off? When they ask about her family, maybe they can somehow remain silent and not talk too much about it. Lord, why did she agree to this trip? On the other hand, sooner or later she will have to meet his family if she wants to be with Andrew, and she really wants to. Her friend calmed her down, advising her to calm down. You can't show them any weakness, otherwise they'll quickly sit on your neck. I would like to go with you, Helen. Kristen finished dreamily, imagining what a meeting with Andrew's relatives could turn into with the participation of a friend in the role of her lawyer. She laughed merrily. As always, Lena's reasoning worked flawlessly. Kristen calmed down and met Andrew, who was following her, with a smile. Well, are you ready? He asked. No, she answered honestly. Kristen, just don't worry, okay? The main thing is that everything goes more or less smoothly with Mom. Everyone else will like you, I'm sure. Andrew muttered and was embarrassed, realizing that he was not saying at all what was needed. And he himself is worried, it seems, even more than Kristen. Kristen and Andrew arrived in the village and, excited, like first graders before their first lesson in their lives, holding hands, they entered the big house. They were really expected, because the spacious living room with huge windows was full of people. Some of them pretended to be doing something, but the majority were not lying. Frankly, and with curiosity, they looked at the chosen one. At first glance, it was clear who exactly was the center of public opinion here. A tall, plump woman of about 50, with a high, carefully styled hairstyle, stood up to meet them. Varnished hair, lips thickly painted with red lipstick, heavy earrings with large red stones, and an equally huge pendant around her neck. A dress made of shiny fabric with an overly bright pattern. All this, of course, was not modern and old-fashioned, but it was, nevertheless, very suitable for this woman. Kristen immediately realized at first sight that this was Andrew's mother, a woman on whom her fate seems to largely depend. Barbara Black was, in every sense of the word, a woman of considerable merit. For many years she worked as the chief accountant of the big vegetable plant, supplying several surrounding cities with fresh vegetables and herbs. The farm was really large and very troublesome, and in order to maintain order in it, one had to have a strong character and determination, great professional knowledge and basic endurance. Barbara possessed all these qualities to the fullest. She always knew about everything that happened at the plant. It doesn't matter what kind of area we were talking about, garages, farming, or the financial service directly subordinate to it. She decisively and with equal firmness dealt with negligent employees, unscrupulous suppliers, or late-paying customers. We need Barbara and the government, the workers laughed. Just as decisively and confidently as at work, Barbara handled household chores. How, with such a workload at work, she managed to keep the house and large household plot in perfect order, one could only guess. However, she had no shortage of help, given the large size of her family. Andrew was born third in their family after 2 girls. One of the sisters was already married and expecting a baby, and the second lived with her parents and cursed the garden, which needed care. The mother, as it seemed to her, loved her son more in her soul than the other children. For some reason, the long-awaited boy was especially dear to her. She always dreamed of some special destiny for him. And of course, it was hardly possible to find this fate here, in their native, albeit in a fairly large and prosperous village. Therefore, she willingly supported her son when he announced his desire to study and live in the city after school. After working at the plant for many years, Barbara and Ben, as Andrew's father was called, saved enough to buy their son a small but quite decent apartment. Andrew graduated from college, received an engineering degree, and got a job. Barbara's appearance suited her character, tall, with large features, which almost always had an expression of determination and confidence in her rightness. With all her appearance, she seemed to be saying to those around her, so it's like this. Point 1, I'm right. Point 2, if I'm wrong. Look at point 1, Barbara had a rather full and wide figure. But in some amazing way, all this did not give the impression of excess weight, but seemed to be a manifestation of strength, solidity. All that remained was to add to this a loud, well-produced voice, from which the repairmen, taken by surprise, dropped their wrenches on the floor. It was precisely such a remarkable lady in every sense of the word that Kristen was destined to like. And yet this village iron businesswoman had one weak point. She loved her husband Ben very much. And this love was mutual. They have been together for more than 30 years. They have gone through difficulties, illnesses, the birth of children, joys and sorrows. And yet they retained some kind of reverent, tender feeling for each other, more likely to be characteristic of a young boy and girl than of 50-year-old parents of 4 children who have begun to turn gray. Ben worked as a chief mechanic at the same plant. He and his wife were jokingly called the Black Mafia. But at the same time, absolutely everyone recognized that both Barbara and Ben took their places completely deservedly and fairly. Ben has long gotten used to his wife's difficult character. I learned to adapt to him, and if necessary, to tame Barbara's temper. She heard only him when it seemed impossible to reach her. She recognized the unconditional authority of her husband, and although she could not deny herself the pleasure of arguing and defending her point of view, she certainly took her husband's opinion into account. Kristen enjoyed her openly appraising gaze and smiled. The smile turned out pitiful and forced. Hello she didn't say, she rather squeaked. In response, she heard, hello, hello, dear guests. Finally, you brought your mysterious stranger to us. Hello, Kristen. Come in. You're welcome. A short, gray-haired man with kind eyes stepped forward. He was very similar to Andrew. He smiled warmly and welcomingly, and Kristen immediately became much calmer. Oh, Andrew looks like him, Kristen finally realized. So this is his dad. My dear son. Finally, he deigned to come and check on us. Barbara finally opened her lips, decisively pushed her husband away, and, as if not noticing Kristen standing next to her, hugged Andrew. Mom, meet me. This is Kristen, he said when he was finally able to emerge from his mother's strong embrace. That's what I understood, said the woman with the face of a queen. Well, let me look at you. Kristen felt that this look was literally breaking her into molecules. Judging by the expression on her face, Barbara didn't particularly like what she saw. True, there were no comments from her. She just took a deep breath. With the rest of the family, everything went much easier and simpler. For the most part, people were friendly and talked with the girl sincerely and with pleasure. She learned many facts about his childhood and youth, and heard somewhat humorous warnings that Andrew was a womanizer. I got acquainted with photographs where he was a baby, still an infant, and sat without clothes, without anything at all. In general, everything was quite fun and positive, if not for the periodically felt glance of Barbara. Then there was a long, plentiful feast, during which they tried to cram a year's worth of food into Kristen. Oh, how great, suddenly one of the sisters exclaimed, snatching a napkin from under Kristen's hand. Kristen did not notice how he sketched a portrait of one of the aunts sitting opposite on a piece of paper. These are living people. Look. Oh, and you're an artist. And draw me. Please. Kristen spent the rest of the evening drawing pictures of those present and receiving admiring reviews. Finally, the endless day came to an end. But okay, that's enough. Let's finish this gathering. Let's all go home. Tomorrow is a hard day. Get up early and get to work, said Barbara. For what work? Andrew asked in surprise. Tomorrow is Sunday. Wait, I thought we would go to the lake, show Kristen our forest, apiary, and generally take a walk, go to a barbecue. How is it? For what work? What barbecue and lake? The mother looked angrily at her son. As far as I can see, you have become quite a city person. You don't think or remember anything at all. We'll dig potatoes tomorrow, Andrew. Well, Mom, what kind of potatoes? We've come to visit. So what? Now will you order us to die of hunger in the winter because of this? We, son, have our own schedule. We have no time for rest now. No, of course, no one is forcing you. Helping us is up to you. Please go for a walk and eat our kebabs. And we have things to do. The woman, looking offended, rose from the table and left the room. For some reason, Kristen's ears lit up. Of course, we must help. True, I have never dug potatoes, but I think it's not that difficult. I'll handle it. She showed a playful look of fear on her face. Kristen, what do you mean help? There's work there all day. Dad, he turned to his father. But I completely forgot about these damn potatoes. You could have warned me. I wouldn't have brought IRA with me. If I came alone, I would bring her next time. Andrew looked at his father reproachfully. Yes, to be honest, I forgot about this damn harvest. I just don't understand why you're so upset. Well, really, as a child, you don't know your mother, do you? Don't pay attention, Ben waved his hand. Well, of course, don't pay attention. When my mother accused me of parasitism in front of everyone, this meat won't go down my throat now. Kristen is hooked. Well, if so, then go with all of us, work there for an hour, and then take my car and leave from there. The father winked at his son, and at the same time his face suddenly looked younger and became somehow boyish. At this moment, father and son were especially similar to each other. Early in the morning, the whole family in several cars was ready to leave. You are going? Well, that's good, son. Barbara looked at her son with a smile, again pretending not to notice Kristen standing next to her. The girl involuntarily noted this. We really need extra male hands. My father is not going. He was urgently called to the plant. We have a serious breakdown there, but he left you the car and said that you agreed on this. For what? Unclear. Barbara shrugged. Andrew winked at Kristen, put his arm around her shoulders and led her to the car. After a few hours spent in the field, Kristen began to feel as if she had always been here and had never seen anything in her life, and would never see anything again, except brown, yellowish and red tubers. By the second break, everything hurt her neck, back, legs, knees, which endlessly bent and unbent, even her fingers, each joint of which throbbed painfully. But she tried not to show it, and, overcoming the ache in her lower back, courageously carried the buckets, which seemed increasingly heavier. Andrew, why do you need so many potatoes? Kristen asked in a whisper, sadly looking around the huge fields and realizing that he couldn't see the edge or end. Listen, to be honest, I never understood this myself. Please forgive me for these damn potatoes. This is just some kind of setup. Come on, it's okay, she muttered, pouring another portion of the Black family's strategic food supply into the pile. Come on, let's go, Andrew begged her several times. My father left me a car. We'll just leave. Nobody will notice. Nobody will notice. Nobody. Your mother? Kristen asked ironically. Well, Mom, of course, will notice, the guy laughed. Of course he will notice, Kristen thought to herself. She just watches me. Without stopping, sooner or later everything ends. Even what seemed endless. The damn potato field is over. Well, city people, thank you for any help, said Barbara. We could manage, of course. Mom, stop it. Andrew stopped his mother, who seemed to be able to explain to Kristen that no one really needed her help, and it was stupid to expect gratitude from her. Why do you rush to her defense all the time, like a cat to a chicken? Honestly, it's downright funny. Am I some kind of monster? Barbara suddenly became offended. Go help me load the shovels into the car, otherwise we'll forget them on the field again, as always. And Kristen and I will stand here and finally talk about our own things. About women's things. Andrew looked at the women uncertainly, and noticing that Kristen nodded, slowly walked towards the car. Well, okay. Now let's get serious, Barbara said after a very long pause. So long that Kristen managed to calm down, get scared, and come to her senses again. Tell me this, Kristen. Barbara reluctantly said the girl's name. You and my son have a serious relationship. Well, are you planning to marry him? To be honest, Barbara, he didn't ask me to marry. For now, anyway. Kristen decided to be brave and looked directly into the eyes of her opponent. But if he calls, I will consider this offer very seriously. You'll think about it. Are you still going to think? Judging by the indignation, Barbara did not appreciate the irony and was sincerely indignant. Look, she's still getting ready to think. What about you yourself? Such a big jewel? I am not a very profitable party at all. Or rather, completely unprofitable, Kristen tried to joke. But the woman did not take this as playful irony. Vice versa. It's very good that you understand this yourself, and you should always remember it. After all, apparently you have nothing. Housing, for example. Yes, I live with my mother, and unfortunately I don't expect an inheritance from anywhere. But I believe in miracles. You never know. Kristen kept trying to soften Andrew's mother, make her laugh, and remove anger and tension from their communication. But she understood everything wrong. But I immediately realized that you were not very well brought up. You don't have to demonstrate this again. I take it you don't have a profession either. Why not? I actually finished school. I tried to defend myself, Kristen. I have a diploma as an artist teacher, by the way, with honors. Well, what kind of profession is this? Draftsman. Honors. Do not make me laugh. I have a younger niece, and she can draw. Well, maybe a little worse than you. So what? How are you going to make a living? Or are you planning to sit on our necks? I don't dare Kristen to sit on your neck, Barbara. Kristen said quietly. And in general, I would like to tell you. If not for us, then for my son. The woman continued, as if not noticing Kristen's words. That is, Andrew will work for you too, and you will draw pictures. Is this how you see your family life? But nothing will work out for you. Don't move. Listen, I won't say it again. If you want to marry my son, get a normal profession. Do you hear? Barbara turned around without warning and quickly walked away. Kristen looked after her silently. Well? Andrew asked with obvious concern. How did you communicate? Yes, we talked. Everyone and my father really liked you. And Mom too. She just told me you have a good girl. Wait and see. Imagine. On the way back, Kristen thought so deeply about everything that had been said that she even stopped feeling pain in her muscles. Or maybe Andrew's mother is right. After all, she is an intelligent, experienced woman. She has achieved everything herself, and she runs such a business. And at home, everything is on track with her. Well, in fact, she, Kristen, cannot feed herself even on her salary. How can she count on a normal family? After all, it turns out that she is some kind of freeloader. Returning to the city, Kristen rushed to find out information about advanced training courses and other ways to obtain additional education. A few days after their return, Andrew spoke with a serious face. Have you thought about studying somewhere else? And I was talking to my mother. She says accountants are needed everywhere now. I don't know how to do it correctly, but in general, you can easily find a job. She even has a friend here in our city. They will hire you without experience. You just need to complete special courses. Kristen looked at Andrew carefully. He understood this look and spoke. Kristen, you understand, Mother won't give us peace anyway. And if you do as she advises, everything will be fine. I didn't tell you my court Kristen as well. Not really my court Kristen. Well, or rather, in fact, of course it's mine, but it's registered to my mother. We have to live there with you. If we decide, Kristen, for my sake. Okay, I'm ready to do anything for you and become anyone, be it a witch or an accountant. I just don't know if I can do it. You see, it will work, he exclaimed confidently. Of course it will work. Everyone can do it. But I'm not everything. I want to do something completely different, I wanted to shout to Kristen, but she remained silent. A few months later, Kristen was working for a large food retail company. She and about 15 other people sat in a huge windowless room, more like a warehouse than an office, and printed an endless document, according to which they then collected and released goods. She now earned almost twice as much as at art school. But there was no talk of any joy or pleasure from work. Kristen felt like a tiny cog in a huge machine, so small and insignificant that even if it falls out, disappears, no one will notice. Kristen, it is you. She heard it once in a big store. Turning around, she saw her old school teacher. He smiled widely. Lord, how glad I am to see you. Well, tell me, how are you doing? Hello. Yes, I live like everyone else. Normally I work. Got married, almost. This is of course wonderful. Congratulations, congratulations. Well, what about creativity, right? I'm still waiting. Maybe you could invite the old man to an exhibition of your works. Drawing is difficult now. Not yet. How so? Are you really not writing at all? It hurts. It's a shame because you have talent. And Kristen, a real talent. Yes, it's a pity. It's a pity. Unfortunately, I still remember your sketches. How so? That's how life turned out. Kristen answered dryly, seeing how the old teacher was lamenting. She, feeling regret, suddenly became offended at him, at herself, at the whole world. She was offended and angry. You see, I need to live on something. It's a pity that the school doesn't teach a course called How Can an Aspiring Artist Avoid Starving to Death? It would be very useful, you know. The old man was taken aback, looked sadly at Kristen and sighed. Well, I was glad to see you. Glad. I wish all the best. He bowed slightly in the old-fashioned manner and walked away. Kristen and Andrew lived in his apartment. A year later, Kristen gave birth to a boy who was named Ted. They never had a wedding. It's just that for some reason neither Kristen nor Andrew talked about it. And then there was no time for that at all. At 2 years old, the baby was diagnosed with heart failure. Kristen's whole life was completely devoted to her son, just as her mother's life had once been dedicated to her. But only if Mom was completely alone, then her beloved man lived in the same apartment with Kristen. At first, despite Ted's illness, she was happy. In any case, she herself was convinced of this. Andrew was caring and gentle. He tried to be at home more often and play with his son. But gradually, at first almost imperceptibly, in some isolated tiny moments, and then more and more often and clearly, something began to happen that meant the end of their family happiness. Andrew began to sometimes delay returning home, at first occasionally and not for long, but gradually more and more often. Kristen, hello. Listen, there's a lot of work. Don't lose me. Okay, she heard it periodically on the telephone receiver. Then came car breakdowns with visits to the workshop, meeting a friend from the plane, a dentist, urgent trips to see his parents. Kristen and Ted were increasingly alone. Andrew gradually became completely different. A wall grew inexorably between him and Kristen. Kristen was afraid to admit this to herself and stubbornly continued to convince herself that everything in her life was good, and that there were minor problems and troubles in every family. At the same time at work, year after year, she did what she did not like and did not understand. The computer and the numbers in the documents gave me headaches and eyes, and the boredom that overwhelmed her in the office was sometimes unbearable. All the old albums, folders with sketches and sketches, once unfinished canvas paintings, everything that was once so dear to her, was her joy, her essence, was collecting dust in her mother's old closed apartment. Anne herself passed away 2 years ago, just as quietly and unnoticed by others as she lived. And the sadness for my mother was also quiet, muted light. Kristen sometimes came to the small apartment, which now became her apartment. She looked through her works, and she had the feeling that she was looking at her past, covered in dust, but still beautiful. And I didn't want to return to the present at all. In the present, she lived some kind of life that was not her own, an incomprehensible, uninteresting, unnecessary life. Relations with my friend Helen were essentially reduced to telephone conversations, which became less and less frequent. Helen, in her usual straightforward manner, scolded Kristen that she was doing something she didn't like and had completely given up drawing, locked herself at home, and saw nothing but a completely idiotic job, as a friend put it. You live as if under a stick, but look at yourself, you look like, I don't know, a young old woman. Ted, meanwhile, turned 5 years old. Andrew sometimes spent the evenings at home, but they hardly spoke. He sat at the computer or spent time on the loggia with a mobile phone in his hand. Kristen began to involuntarily notice that when she appeared, he tried to minimize the screen on the monitor or turn off the device, or end the conversation. Andrew's phone, which was usually lying around wherever possible, always forgotten by its owner in the most unexpected places, was now always either in his hands or in his pocket. Kristen wandered around the apartment like a ghost, studied with Ted, put him to bed, and went to bed herself. Then she lay for a long time, listening to Andrew settling down for the night in the next room. We need to talk. She finally decided to break the unbearable silence at home. Tell me honestly, do you have someone? He looked at Kristen. Actually, she no longer needed an answer spoken out loud. What happened to us? She asked Andrew. After all, once upon a time, everything was so good with us. You loved me, I loved you. Life was wonderful. What has changed? Why have we changed so much? You are the one who has changed, and I'm no longer interested in you. And then, let's be honest, I never told you that I love you. Did I like you? Yes, very. You were so unusual, not like everyone else, different in everything. And then she turned into some kind of gray mouse. But it's you. You forced me to become different, forced me to change, to leave everything I loved, quit my favorite thing. You. You know, my mother warned me that you would blame us for everything. And so it happened. What did you leave there? What's the matter? You'd think you could be a great artist. Nothing would have come of you anyway. Well, at most I would draw pictures for advertising signs. Kristen closed her eyes tiredly. How right Helen was when she said that she, Kristen, sold herself. And now she is paying for this betrayal. If you expect to get something from me, you are in vain. We are not registered, and you have no rights to my property. Of course you will move out of the apartment. Ted. Kristen looked at the man in panic. He saw this look, and something similar to shame flashed in his eyes. Ted, of course, will live with you. Andrew said embarrassedly. I'm not a bastard to take Kristen away from the child's mother. He seemed to have recovered from his momentary weakness, cast aside his conscience, and continued. And about alimony, keep in mind that I don't officially work. There's nothing special to take from me. If you try to sue me. Andrew, tell me honestly, Kristen, sitting comfortably on a kitchen stool, put her hands on the table and rested her chin on her fists. Did your mother write the words for this speech? What other words? What does this have to do with Mom? He was nervous. Her behavior infuriated him. She didn't make a fuss, didn't cry, didn't beg him for anything. She simply looked at him with her attentive gaze, as if noticing all the details for the future portrait. These are not your thoughts. You can't be that scoundrel. I don't believe. But don't be afraid. In any case, I don't need anything from you. Kristen said, looking at Andrew with sad regret. Everything I need is already with me. What is this? He became wary. What do you mean? Ted, Kristen said calmly. And myself, the real one. The former one, I forgot, Kristen, you. It's just something you don't need. Kristen took Ted's things and went to her old apartment. A few days later, she realized that there was no trace left of her loneliness. She was herself again, the mistress of her life. And paintings and drawings like old friends supported her. With the new job, everything happened completely by accident. Lena, with whom Kristen again communicated, as in the old days, often easily and directly, without choosing Kristen, I had the time and mood, giving themselves to each other and not expecting anything in return, as true friends should communicate, had a birthday. Helen, my dear, happy birthday. Kristen hugged her friend and entered the large living room. She's been here many times. She liked the spacious, bright room with a minimal amount of furniture and a huge shaggy carpet in the center. But today something was wrong. Something was terribly in the way, creating severe discomfort. Kristen looked carefully at the living room and realized exactly what it was: a huge, bright, but surprisingly tasteless flower bouquet standing on the table. It was composed of chic, unusual flowers and greenery, but it gave the impression of some kind of expensive bad taste. Kristen tried not to pay attention to him, but her artistic taste violently protested. No, I'm sorry, but I can't do this, Helen. It's terrible. Where did you get this terrible bouquet? There is no composition, the colors simply oppress each other. Can I correct it a little? This here is completely unnecessary. That's better, right? Well, wait a minute. Helen suddenly stared at her friend. Exactly, I came up with it. This is brilliant, what you need. Listen, I have a client. We are working on a contract with her. FIFA, you know, is all about itself. By the way, she gave me this bouquet. She has several flower shops with a pretense of sophistication. The prices for flowers there are simply terrible. When I looked at one of her contracts with suppliers, I thought that, judging by the figures, she was selling imported medicines. Well, you know, these flowers have a name that will break your tongue. So she complained that she did not have decent bouquet makers. Like them, Helen recalled the right word with a snap of her fingers: florists. Well, what do I have to do with it? Kristen shrugged. I'm not a florist. But you are an artist. Who, if not you, should know what is beautiful and what is not? Exactly. I'll talk to her, we'll send you to courses and start working. You know, Helen, I've had enough courses. I tried to resist Kristen, but Helen, who had gained momentum, was not easy to stop. The new case has taken over Kristen completely. Finally, she again plunged into the beauty of paint, the form of her imagination. Each flower was a separate work of art for her, and those collected together were her personal works. It was as if she was painting human feelings and emotions with colors. She wrote with inspiration, boldly telling stories of love, gratitude, tenderness, and determination with each bouquet. Of course, she, or rather her composition, has regular customers and fans. People sometimes just came to look, admire, and feel the harmony. You know, Kristen, it looks like we need to make a personal showcase for your work, the business owner remarked, smiling. Among her regular clients, Kristen soon began to single out one who periodically went to the flower salon. He was a rather tall, thin man with a small gray beard and hair. He wore thin glasses with gold frames, and all this made his face somehow not modern, as if from the last century. Interesting person. Kristen quietly pointed at him with her eyes to her partner. Someone not from here, as if he appeared from the last century. It will stand for a short time and disappear again. It won't disappear. A girl named Alice answered ironically. He lives quite well in the present. Be calm. Don't you know who it is? Wow, this is George. Well, the same one who runs the car plant. They say he can buy and sell our entire city. He visited us regularly. He has an office nearby, that huge building on the corner. A strange man, he will stand at the display window and stand there, sigh and smile. Maybe he's sick? Well, the rich have their own quirks. Alice was clearly not against continuing the conversation about the visitor, who was interesting in every sense. But Kristen could not stand gossip, and nodding to Alice, stepped aside. Tell me, please. Kristen heard a quiet voice, sounding clear but soft. This is what people say who don't need to be listened to, because everyone already shuts up when they want to say something. Can I talk to the person who compiled them? Yes, please. It's me. Kristen smiled lightly and looked into his eyes. Do you want to buy them? No, I mean yes, or rather he adjusted his glasses. Actually, I would like something like that. No, these are also beautiful, but for me they are too bright, you know. I would like something, how to put it. He fell silent, looking for the right word. Calm down, apparently she suggested. Yes, it's definitely calmer, exactly, the man rejoiced. A very precise word. How did you pick it up? It's not me. This is the theory of artistic art, well-known terminology, answered by Kristen. So you need a calm, warm monochrome? For whom? Can you provide some details? For a woman 56 years old. 3 grandchildren, financier, blonde. He encouraged Kristen's words, taking short pauses between them, and smiled, as if appreciating a new interesting game. Well, I'll try. Kristen smiled in response. This is simply amazing. Each of your bouquets is like, I don't know, like a canvas, a painting. Yes, that's exactly the picture. The man looked admiringly at the bouquet compiled before his eyes. You're just an artist, Kristen, he added, looking at her badge. I'm glad you like it, she said with a slight bow. Like very much. I'm sure the recipient will be absolutely delighted. Thank you, maestro. He carefully took the large bouquet and walked towards the exit of the salon. He came into the salon quite often. Too often for a man and a businessman. This was quite unusual. One day, while selling him the 3rd bouquet in a week, Kristen looked up at him with a smile. You buy flowers so often. She decided to notice. You obviously have many reasons for this. Do you really need a reason to give flowers? I just like to give flowers, he replied, with or without reason. You know, it's like taking colored pencils and coloring a gray sheet. Kristen looked at the man suspiciously, trying to determine if he was mocking her. He uttered very unusual, strange words for a man, especially one who was considered one of the unofficial masters of the city. Flowers are beautiful, and there should be many of them in life. It's true? That's what everyone thinks, don't they? But many people probably think so. But to put these thoughts into practice, frankly speaking, you are the first person on my path who does this. Kristen laughed. Besides, he continued, your salon is very conveniently located between the house where I live and my office building, so we can assume that I come to you on the way home or to work. Well, the last argument is why I began to come here much more often than before. He looked carefully at Kristen. I assume you know it's your work and you. The last words were added very quietly. Kristen flushed, lowered her head, and pretended she hadn't heard, depicting extreme busyness. You know, Kristen, your works still have one big drawback. Kristen raised her head in surprise. Yes, yes. And this flaw migrates from one of your jobs to another. They are all beautiful, but short-lived, alas. And sometimes I want your bouquet to stay with me forever. This one, for example. Do you want me to do it? Would you like me to draw it for you? Suddenly suggested Kristen, who suddenly wanted to pick up brushes and paints until her fingers trembled and she cried. 3 years have passed. On a wonderful May morning, Kristen got up very early and still realized with fear that she was unlikely to have time to do everything that was planned. Today is the day of a grand event that she has dreamed of all her life. Just yesterday she was pleased with how everything was organized, but in the morning she suddenly realized with horror that she needed to change the position of the paintings and put on additional light. On the contrary, several huge windows need to be covered. You definitely need to remove the last 2 pictures. Still, it was not for nothing that she felt that they were not ready yet. Everything had to be perfect, and for this, a lot more needed to be done. It was necessary to call a dozen places, coordinate a huge number of little things, which as usual, came out at the last moment. Despite the fact that today's entire event had been carefully planned and prepared for a long time, it was organized by the best specialists, and yet, it was her business, her life. And only she knew how everything should really be. Today, a personal exhibition Kristen opened at the Central Art Gallery of the city. As experts wrote about her, she is one of the most talented and promising artists of recent times. Well, are you ready for world fame? A huge bouquet of wet, half-bloomed peonies, probably consisting of at least 100 flowers, cautiously entered the room. The bouquet had man's legs. The immense bunch of flowers moved slightly, and from behind it appeared a thin face with a beard and glasses with thin gold frames sitting on his nose. No, I'm not ready, Kristen laughed, feeling her anxiety, worry, and excitement disappear like smoke. She came up and hugged the bouquet, which the man continued to hold in his hands on the other side. Then she moved the delicate, subtly fresh-smelling buds and kissed the cheek that appeared. Kristen, he whispered, I love you and am very proud of you. I love you very much too, George. Thanks for all. A few hours later, Kristen, in a stunning dress, accepted congratulations on the resounding success of her exhibition. A little to the side, squinting in pleasure in the bright light, stood George, her husband, the man thanks to whom her dream became possible. The man who loved her for who she was. After an endless reception, the couple finally got ready to go home and got into the car. Kristen, she suddenly heard. A man in a driver's uniform stood a little to the side. He had a baseball cap on his head. The face was in shadow, but in the figure, in the pose, in the manner of holding her right hand a little back, Kristen felt something very familiar. She looked closely, and a light, sad, barely noticeable smile touched her lips. Wait a minute. Okay? She said in the direction of George, who was already sitting in the car behind the wheel, and moved towards the one who was standing. Andrew, she didn't ask, she said affirmatively. Hello. Hello, he answered hoarsely. I hardly recognized you, but I still recognized you. Well, congratulations. So you achieved your goal, you became queen. He grinned wryly and said, Andrew. No, I just became myself, Kristen smiled. Robert had been surrounded by female attention since kindergarten. The girls tried to be paired with him at matinees, brought him candy and cookies from home, insisted that at quiet time their crib was next to each other. They demanded at home that they bought the most beautiful hairpins for their hair or weave into the braid a brighter colored ribbon. This frenzy never ceased. At school, this state of affairs only worsened. Not by years, a tall boy with dark hair and blue eyes broke the hearts of not only classmates, but also teachers from the fairer sex. They did not raise their hands to reprimand him or lower his grade when his answers were not up to the highest grade. Although his appearance did not resemble the appearance of an angel, he did not look like a demon at all. He was like a stately, humble Greek god with a piercing gaze and an enchanting smile. He didn't speak, but he spoke the words that obediently formed into correct sentences without stuttering. He studied easily, took prizes at Olympiads in all subjects, gallantly asked girls to dance at festive parties, moved amazingly during incendiary discos, turning any music into his obedient servant. Robert and Elizabeth were inseparable almost from the very beginning of their acquaintance. It was useless to drive a wedge between them. The girl moved to this city with the family of her military father. She was laconic in everything: clothes, hairstyle, school bag, pens, and notebooks. When the class wanted to make fun of it, Robert was right there. Somehow it happened that he took under his protection a little girl who stood last in the long row in gym class. The girl with gray eyes, two pigtails, tied with black rubber bands, for some reason caused in him a pinch of pity. A lump in his throat stuck. But this little girl was not a bad girl. She pulled the girls back, asking what kind of dense material she was made of. We lived in the north for a long time. In the schools there, they were heated in winter, but we still had to insulate additionally. Do you want to talk about it? The curious people backed off at once. What's the point of getting involved with someone like that? It's not worth it. She's too quick with her tongue. Robert grinned to himself and invited Elizabeth to sit at the same desk with him. It's free. I usually sit alone. You'll be comfortable. You can see the blackboard. It's the penultimate desk in this row by the window. In his soul, he had not yet settled in Elizabeth's address romantic notes, but he always wanted to take care of her like some young, helpless puppy. At home, he had a beagle given to him just at that time for his birthday. He had dreamed of a sheepdog, but their apartment would not support such a large dog. Here in their family, an appeared mischievous, cute beagle, a faithful friend, selflessly loving later their masters and completely unpretentious in care, the sweetest companion with soft ears and a long tail. Robert was unusually patient with his parents, cuddling and nurturing him all the time. Suddenly he realized that Elizabeth was more than just a friend, companion, and sister in spirit to him. When she badly shattered her knees one winter when she fell on the ice, they were already in 8th grade at the time. From a small, graceful statue, Elizabeth began to turn into a petite young lady with the crushes inherent in her young age. The girl was incredibly stubborn. She dragged him home after school across a smooth, vacant lot prepared for digging foundations for a new building. "Don't go, Robert. It'll be 5 minutes before we're home. It's too long and uninteresting to walk around that fence, especially in this weather," she urged. He'd fallen for her pleas. Now she was sitting on the cold ground with her tights torn to shreds and deep lacerations on her knees, stumbled over pieces of rebar left behind by who knows who. He didn't hesitate long, picked her up in his arms and carried her to his house where no one was present. In the apartment, he treated the wounds, which after he had washed away all the blood with peroxide, did not seem so horrible anymore. They were 14 years old. Hormones were certainly starting to rage in their bodies by now, but they weren't what made him kiss her lap near the wounds. Tenderness nudged him gently. She wasn't frightened. She leaned over, hugged his head, and nuzzled the top of his head. "Robert, are you scared? It's okay. You've got tea in the house or something to go with it, haven't you?" "I'm starving. I'll never make it home," she laughed. From that day on, they kissed each other on the cheek when they met. They walked mostly hugging now, but without any hint of closer proximity. Peer girls were ready to wipe Robert in powder for the fact that Robert did not notice anyone around, but they did not dare to do any harm. Only sometimes they let out barbs. But the young couple could do nothing. Even stain their friendship could not, so pure and light it was. In the graduating class, everything suddenly changed. Both grew up and could no longer ignore the natural laws of nature. Robert realized that this was his first love. She was not a whim or a temporary eclipse brought on by young age. This girl had firmly established herself in his heart. It happens that even handsome men belong to the clan of those who meet their only woman once and are faithful to love her afterward for a lifetime. Let someone try to argue that this is a fairy tale. After school, both entered the university, he at the Faculty of Physics and she at the Faculty of Economics. In the educational institution on, Robert again began the hunt. Having gone through the crucible of naive passions at school, Elizabeth and Robert did not even cast a glance at his admirers, and they, like snakes, hissed back. Where's he ever been? He's at least in Hollywood, starring in a movie instead of Richard Gere. They can't be together. It's absurd. In one of the lectures in my freshman year, I was amused by a scene. The subject was common history. Different departments listened to it together, without division into physicists, chemists, geographers, and economists. Among the female students, as usual, was its star, its first beauty, its prima donna. She had bet with her fellow students that she would steal Robert away from Elizabeth in no time. She was counting on her striking looks. Men on the streets would crane their necks when they saw her in the crowd. She didn't mince words with the guy, she just sat down on his lap without even giving him a second thought. In front of the student crowd, not at all embarrassed. Robert didn't bother to embarrass the arrogant person. With an expression as if he had touched a nasty toad, he took her by the shoulder with 2 fingers and pulled her off his lap. "Don't ever do that again. My heart is occupied. It's about time you all realize that." Belle was taken aback. "Are you talking about that roof that's always dangling beneath your feet? Don't make us all laugh. What could you possibly have in common with her?" Robert's blue eyes filled with an angry glint. "Thank you, my girlfriend can't hear you right now. But the rest of us should know that behind your beautiful shell hides an evil heart that knows no true feelings. You're nothing. I don't envy anyone who would give their soul to you. You'd trample it for nothing." After these words, the curious crowd parted and Elizabeth came up. Robert calmly put his arm around her shoulders and said, "Come, let us sit in the other row. There's a foul smell of meanness here. I hate that insidious odor." Elizabeth did not understand anything, but she did not argue with him, as was her custom. Her man was young. That was a fact, but always very sensible. If he said so, there was some truth in it, however strange. He had also announced to her parents 6 months ago, in the same cavalier manner, "Elizabeth and I love each other, and that's forever. We'll quarrel a little at university, and then we'll get married. Our decision is not subject to appeal, so all arguments are canceled in advance." Both families lived modestly. Parents couldn't afford a separate place for their children. Therefore, at a general family meeting before the modest wedding, it was decided that Robert and Elizabeth would marry after the 3rd year of study, when the university begins training in a narrow professional profile. So they did. Further in their life, everything was very similar to the life of other families. They did not grab stars from the sky in material terms. At the end of their 5th year, Joan's firstborn was born. 3 years later, Catherine. Just like to write a classic saga, married, have produced 2 children, dreaming of a 3rd child. The search for women around Robert persistently continued. Even the boss of his mother's colleague laid her eyes on him. In his office hung his portrait. He invited the door on the key immediately locked in his fashion attire. Shows of new collections of local tailoring sometimes happened. The place specialized in men's clothing. The walking mannequin was a left-handed kid. The catch was that the audience immediately recognized his unconventional orientation. The audience started laughing. And then Robert caught the eye of the businesswoman. "We don't want such a nature to go to waste. And we don't want such a nature to go to waste. Young man, only dress up, and the butterflies will no longer choose suits for clients, and this miracle to admire." Catch a Guy decided to catch a high fee, which intended to also include services of a personal nature for herself and defile on the runway for business. When I told Robert the salary, he couldn't believe his ears. "What kind of accomplishments? You offer me a salary 5 times more than my mother, a seamstress with vast experience." The woman once again assessed him from head to toe. "You seem like a big boy, bigger than some. I don't need to explain it to you. If you are obedient, I will buy you an apartment, a car, fancy rags, accessories. I will take you to restaurants and hotels. I will teach you to have an elite vacation at the seaside. You'll travel with me a couple times a year. Isn't that a tempting prospect?" "I think you misunderstood me." Robert removed her hand. "I'm not the one to make that kind of offer. Find yourself another easygoing boy, and don't let my refusal to get back at my mother make you regret it." The incident was over. The lady didn't bother him anymore. After her, there was a smashing master of men's haircuts. She kept trying to press up against him during the process of fighting with his unruly hair. He was so accustomed for his short life to such outbursts from the female sex that he never paid any attention to them. Nor were the pretenders to his heart offended. He was too good-looking. It's a sin to be angry with such a man. Robert, even in the university, disappointed in applied physics. It wasn't the way he'd envisioned it at school. All the 4th and 5th year in the evenings he went, as if on the 2nd shift, to the liquor factory to work part-time. They just loaded the finished product for shipment to the regions, and they lived in a rented apartment. There was a new monetary unit, 1 gun, or 1/2 liter for stronger drinks. Jokes are jokes, but Jennifer and Robert themselves were indifferent to alcohol. But they used it actively as gifts to a plumber for replacing a faucet, to an electrician for repairing the wiring. Robert was constantly missing at work. During the day he worked as a design engineer at a machine building plant, and in the evenings a loader. Jennifer sat with the children, smoothly transitioning from one maternity leave to another. She had not yet applied her talents in economics. They lived amicably. Robert got along with his wife's parents, Jennifer with his parents. The usual family unit. That seemed to be the end of their story. But would fate let them go without a trial? They were waiting for a loving couple. And what a couple. The attack of severe pain in his back caught Robert in the evening. It was a cold winter at home. He was still working at the liquor factory. Times were tough. Although Jennifer had put her eldest son in kindergarten, the younger Catherine constantly demanded attention and was often unreasonably cranky. It was impossible to go outside with her in cold weather. Pulling pain with periodic sharp jabs in the area of the spine forced the man to go to the doctors. There he first heard a new word that became a diagnosis: hernia. As he understood from the doctor's words, it was about problems with the spine and discs. The doctors assured him that if he took care and did not lift heavy weights, everything would be fine with constant monitoring. He would live happily ever after. So Robert had to say goodbye to loading and unloading for now, a source of money. The financial situation of the family is somewhat shaken, and Catherine has not outgrown childhood colds, constantly either sniffling or coughing. District pediatrician strongly advised to take the girl in the summer to the sea, preferably for a couple of months. Otherwise, she would also be sick at school. Elizabeth, of course, found it impossible to go to the sea with only one daughter. It was out of the question financially to have a vacation with the 4 of them. The solution was to choose the lesser of 2 evils. Go to the sea with the 3 of us and the children. Robert somehow in 2 months will get out to them at least for a weekend. That's how the 3 of them went to the more or less democratic Anapa. Robert stayed home to do chores. Since some time a new tenant had settled in their house, a woman in her 40s, the owner of several clothing stores in the city. She moved into an apartment in a remote neighborhood, she said, so that the eyes of her husband, after a high-profile divorce, did not see her. The clever husband tried to sue half of the business from her, and the case with boutiques she created and developed herself. As she liked to quote the hero of the movie, Ivan Vasilievich changes profession by hard labor. Andrei and the yard-bright lady immediately noticed, and he seemed to her so flawless that she immediately wanted to participate in his fate. She invited him to work for her. Engineer, physicist, and fashionable business, 2 parallel planes. But surprisingly, he did well. His machine building plant was living its last days. The technological lines were obsolete. No one, not even the most talented designer, could come up with anything ingenious to get this enterprise back on its feet. And the neighbor needed an assistant with decent looks, who could charm the partners with charisma and impeccable manners. Robert was perfect for this role. As for his wife, she just needed a deputy with an ideal reputation as a model family man. Her chain of stores was called Family. It stood for 7 friendly eyes. They sold clothes for men and women, as well as for children. Michael was very skeptical of her suggestion. He laughed, "Where am I with my technical education? And where are the clothes, new collections, all this glitter and tinsel of rags and accessories?" Jacqueline, on the other hand, was not so adamant. "Michael, do you underestimate yourself? Each of us should be willing to sell what we have in abundance. In your case, it's God-given beauty, so why not turn it into a popular commodity for the sake of your well-being? Let's just give it a try. A month's work with me won't cost you anything." He walked home and thought wistfully, nothing will come of this collaboration. She will again start looking for ways to get closer to me. And for me, such an option is impossible. The man was wrong. Jacqueline was a much wiser and more astute woman. She already had a young and strong companion for her health, but he was not smart enough to be seen with him in public, and her firm needed a male face. She used herself as a female face. What was missing was an idyllic image, an assistant with an impeccable reputation. Michael agreed to the experiment. Especially at the factory, everyone was on leave without pay for an indefinite period of time. Time was passing, Soon his family would return from the sea, and the house was empty. He couldn't make any money while his loved ones were improving their health on the coast. Jacqueline taught him the science of being, not appearing to negotiate patiently, to watch his speech, to dress tastefully even for a little money, to be able to maintain a conversation on any topic. She persistently dragged him along to all business meetings and brought him into her circle. After a couple of weeks, Michael calmed down. Jacqueline did not make any attempts. She diligently molded him into an enterprising business partner who is not lost in any commercial situation, will calculate ahead of all the moves, will increase the accumulated, save previously achieved. When Elizabeth returned home, she did not recognize Robert. At the train station, they were met by a respectable man in a strict, elegant suit, matching shirt, stylish tie. From surprise, she could not restrain irony. Where did such a handsome uncle come from? Then she rushed towards him and hung on her lover's neck. No, you told me, of course, that you changed your job. But I could not imagine that the change in you would be so radical. At home, in a clean apartment, Elizabeth and the children were waiting for a set table, new toys, items of clothing, bought by the head of the family as a gift. It would be a happy life. But insidious envy is always around. In a barrel of honey finds a spoonful of tar. The range of Robert's duties included not only labor everyday life, but also accompanying the owner of the stores, Jacqueline, to corporate events held in her company and at the enterprises of colleagues in the trade. For some time now, Jacqueline had been obsessed with the idea of expanding the chain with 2 new department stores. She suddenly wanted families to be able to shop in her facility entirely without leaving the buildings and retail space. She was already negotiating for furniture. But even that didn't seem enough for her. In her dreams, she saw people coming into her realm for the day. In addition to non-food items, peeking into retail outlets with a large assortment of high-end products from farmers and private owners. Then it's off to a cafe, a pastry shop, to celebrate successful purchases with drinks and sweets. She even found such a chef that she believed in success in advance. His handmade cakes and pastries were amazing. Even adherents of eternal diets could not resist and sat down at the table with everyone. The business promised to be very profitable and promising. Only one obstacle hindered these endeavors. An official from the city administration did not want to put her signature on the authorization documents for operation. She was an impenetrable old-school aunt with no visible weaknesses. Jacqueline went all out, pulling in all her connections. But the case was stalled. Robert's boss was quite desperate, but then she learned a thing that made her hair stand on end. It turns out that the Iron Lady secretly liked to play, went to neighboring cities to indulge her passion for gambling away from the prying eyes of fellow countrymen. Moreover, she was very fortunate in this vice of hers. The owners of gambling houses were afraid of her appearance. Luck did not leave her for long, constantly increasing her secret capital, but no one tried to prevent her. After all, Madame was from the highest echelon of power at the local level and could close gambling establishments with a single movement of the hand. Having learned such sensational news, Jacqueline immediately decided to give Robert a delicate assignment. She will hire a private detective to find out what kind of places this lady likes to visit. Robert will casually get acquainted with her and try to get dirt in the form of photos and videos of her game. Yes, it wasn't the most ethical way to get the lady to back off. Jacqueline didn't like it herself. But what else was there to do? In the fight against the enemy, all means are good, even such a sneak attack. The preparations for the operation went smoothly. For a good fee, the secretary of the administrative lady leaked the information that she had taken a few days of vacation at work at her own expense. All indications were that she was going on a trip to one of the cities where she could indulge in gambling. After tracing where the train tickets had been bought, Robert was sent on a business trip. He only joked. "You've made a commercial spy out of me? You've got addresses, passwords, where to go and who to introduce myself as. The only thing left to do is to glue on a mustache and a beard for conspiracy. And then we can go on the job." One thing he didn't tell anyone. Robert took home all his savings, saved for a rainy day, to try his luck next to his lucky aunt. Moreover, he borrowed a large sum from the head of security at Jacqueline's office. It never occurred to anyone that he was playing with his luck, and he'd had a large drink of whiskey at the bar beforehand. Robert sat at the table next to the lady from the administration and was terribly angry. She bet on one number or the other, chose black or red color. and almost always won at least a small amount of money. He, on the other hand, lost every last dime. All the promises of beginner's luck turned out to be nothing, and he was never lucky. The waiter kept bringing him whiskey on the rocks. His head was getting heavier and heavier. He had forgotten all about his mission. At some point, his patience broke. He rose abruptly from the table, pushing away the waiter who was just about to pour him another drink. With a hard look at his lucky neighbor, he shouted, "Fuck you and your administrative capabilities. I'm here almost in my underpants camera carried to film you at the game, and you do not give a damn. It's all ha 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 until you've had enough." It was a scandal. Security instantly searched it and found hidden cameras and recorders. The official threw the money and instantly disappeared from the hall, not forgetting to grab the winnings. Jacqueline could not forgive Robert for the failure of the operation. That powerful lady couldn't. With some inner instinct, she realized who was so interested in collecting dirt on her. Jacqueline's dream of creating a nice shopping and entertainment centers crumbled into small shards. Now, when she met Robert in the yard, she didn't even say hello, deliberately averting her face. Robert came home like a beaten dog. The family piggy bank was empty. A servant from Jacqueline's entourage hinted to him that he would not wait long for the loan to be repaid. He would soon put him on the meter and follow him everywhere. At the machine factory, where Robert had a small position, they were not going to start the lines. Thoughts swirled in his head that his ex-wife was wrong. Where to sell beauty if no one in this world wants it? Only at the distillery did he have all the peace and serenity. Maybe he is weak, worthless head of the family, not capable of anything in this life. By all accounts, it appeared that his only dignity, loyalty, and devotion to his beloved woman. But he had nothing to feed her and the children. His feet carried him to the glass rows of vodka and liquor bottles. Where he had worked before, he could be useful. Why, his back was aching by evening, and he would bear it. His wife needn't know how he earned every penny. Soon tales are told and deeds are done. Usually within 2 years of working at the liquor factory, the family's financial situation has improved. Son Joan and daughter Catherine already went to school. Elizabeth found a job as a cashier in a small company. The salary was meager, but she could pick up her children after school, take them to classes, feed them at home properly, and check their lessons without rushing. The globe was spinning on its axis. The years went by slowly. The next bright burst in the career of 30-year-old Robert happened as if by magic. Apparently, the heavens took pity on his monotonous, like Groundhog Day, life. By that time, he had not bothered to find a more decent job. He remained infantile and uninitiative in this respect. He had little faith that there would be any change in his professional destiny. Elizabeth was tired of convincing him that Jacqueline's education and his looks could have been a good match for him. But he had been dealing with money debts for so long that he had always avoided any career opportunities, as if they were the hot milk of failure, potentially shaking his temporary well-being. Further events unfolded as follows. Robert's home liquor company began bottling a new line of elite liqueurs. In such cases, one cannot do without advertising, which the management did. In one of the pleasant spring days, the factory yard was filled with unusual noise. A commotion began. A crowd of curious people gathered. It's not every day that a real movie is shot in front of your eyes, a whole series of reels. Rumor has it that even billboards will be prepared. See how the bosses have splurged, whispered in the crowd. The workers must have had high hopes for those chocolate and coffee liqueurs. They're too sweet for us, too sweet, too sweet. They say they're aristocratic drinks for the ladies. But for us, it's all the same, as long as the advance payment and wages are paid on time. To the surprise of the audience, an ugly scene played out right in front of their eyes. Some actor of the local theater suddenly got into a pose and began to argue with the director and cameraman. "Why didn't you tell me at once that you had to present ladies' goods? This you spoil my whole image of brutality, my reputation as a macho on stage and on the screen. Find him among the workers, someone with a face, and shoot him on your billboards." "What kind of whimsy is that?" echoed him in the tone of a confused director. "Where will I find a suitable texture here? They all have matchstick faces. Well, how with such a hot drink? It's a Klondike to work next to them." The workers looked at each other resentfully. The sight was no longer languid, and they immediately became offended. "You insult us, my man. You insult us, my man. Our beauties have their own glamour. Your acting is no match for his. There he is. Robert was passing by on his way to the dining room for lunch. He never liked noisy spectacles, so he tried to stay away from the performance organized by advertising specialists at the factory. But curiosity, as always, won out. The director was a master of shooting commercials. They could use an extra, even a popular model with a fresh face. The reality exceeded all his expectations. Past the improvised set was such a handsome man of 35 years that the director in the first moments dumbfounded, then quickly pulled himself together and asked to follow him and sprint. It would be a big mistake to miss such material. A man? Yes, you, I'm talking to you. Could you slow down a bit? I can't keep up with you, he said. To what do I owe? Robert stared at him with his impossible blue eyes. I don't have such a long lunch break, and there are long lines in the cafeteria. The director looked him over once more from head to toe. Oh, what a good-looking man. His breed, his manners, his impeccable masculine figure, his correct facial features, seasoned with charisma. He was ready to pinch himself on the arm. Such Hollywood standards with snow-white teeth can't just walk around an old-fashioned distillery unperturbed. Yes, he doesn't seem to know the price of his appearance, thought the director, and said aloud, would you agree to help us out? Inner instinct of advertising business master for some reason immediately realized that to promise this man a golden mountain from the jump is not worth it. Here it is necessary to press on pity, to emphasize the failure of deadlines, on friendship and mutual assistance, to tell about the deadlocked situation with the actor suddenly refusing to shoot, as in the water looked. At first, Robert did not want to hear about any filming, heartily laughed in response to compliments of his beauty and relevance. I have already once tried to sell my appearance as a marketable commodity. Nothing good came out of it. Somehow I do not want to go again in such experiments. Do not chop from the shoulder, tried to press on the pity of the director. If we had not had unforeseen circumstances, I would not have persuaded you now. You'd be a great help to us if you'd agree to do at least a billboard movie. Robert shuddered when he heard the amount of the fee he was being offered. The director decided not to be stingy, not to save money on a debutante. The man thought that this amount could be enough for a small trip to the sea for the four of us. Soon summer vacations. The children could use such an opportunity. 2 weeks later, huge billboards were hung all over the city, on which Robert drank liquor with the lady of his heart. Her role in the photo was played by a young student of the theater school, pretty as a rosebud in her youthful charm. Both looked at each other with such love, holding shot glasses of chocolate liqueur, that there was no doubt. There it was, the cause of the romantic mood lurking at the bottom of the elegant vessels. Sales of the liquor increased dramatically. The director rubbed his hands and waited for the release of commercials. In them, the sweet couple also starred brilliantly. He was very pleased with the photo, talent, and unexpected ability of Robert not to look in the frame stiff. That's the kind of guy the camera loves. After the launch of the videos, Robert began to be recognized on the street, and the products of the factory began to be ordered to other regions. Women looked at the colorful picture and demanded that their men urgently try the magic drink. The fees of 2 random models increased many times over. In the office of the director, more and more often began to hear phone calls. Rising star, shown in a successful commercial, suddenly urgently needed in his colleagues. But he firmly kept the situation under control, took on the production of commercials advertising men's perfume, and then sportswear. Before, Robert faced a dilemma to stay to work as a loader at his native distillery, or to listen to the advice of the new boss and go into the advertising business. The scale was outweighed by a vacation. This time they were able to go on vacation, all 4 of them. Elizabeth and the children were over the moon. Robert even stopped paying attention to more and more often arising in his back pain, until he did not disrupt another shooting. He went to the hospital with a severe attack of intervertebral hernia. Life apart from him flowed in its own way. Good they were now, as they call it, with money, could afford to undergo a medical examination in a private clinic. The doctor's conclusion this time was not so rosy. His work as a loader had done its job. His professional trauma had turned into a herniated disc. Robert had to spend a month in the clinic. Through the efforts of therapeutic exercise, drips, and skillful actions of the medical staff, doctors brought him back into action. Before discharge, they admonished him forget forever about heavy physical exertion, even medium, sharp movements of the body. Otherwise, next time you will find yourself right on the operating table. The verdict was final, not subject to appeal. The director met his favorite with open arms. The man no longer worked for him on the Bird's rights of the model, which occasionally invited to revitalize some video. Unexpectedly, Robert once proposed an innovative technical idea, then the next. Now he not only starred in his, at first seemingly fantastic developments based on the laws of applied physics, but also came up with more and more new solutions. After he was hospitalized, the company somehow drastically reduced its management, drew conclusions. It was time to offer their talented generator of ideas a solid place in the executive chair. In the active labors on the advertising field, Robert did not even notice how the whole 5 years flew by. Joan has already had time to finish school. There was another significant event from a clumsy teenager. Resembling an ugly duckling, he suddenly turned into a copy of his father. Only his eyes were gray, huge, like Elizabeth's. History repeated itself. The guy was adored by all the classmates and girls from other schools, except that he didn't have his dad's stamina for attention from the female sex. He changed girlfriends like gloves, broke hearts carelessly, in passing, often forgetting the names and appearance of casual companions for one night. Robert and Elizabeth only had their heads in their hands. Joan heeded none of their exhortations. Preds. What do you know, honestly? I don't care how many girls I've had and how many more I'll have. They hang on me in bunches. Why should I deny myself the pleasure? I'm not going to go to school like you. I've already chosen the advertising department, which trains PR managers. I'll approach my dad's current business with more modern technology. But if I'm also invited to do a movie, it'll only be better. Fame will find its hero, or heroes. Joan wasn't your typical narcissist. At first he was shocked that so many members of the fair sex follow him in droves. He laughed I should take another shower. Is it in the maternity hospital? Or is it smeared for them he was bombarded in social networks with offers, and in real-life notes and invitations to parties and picnics, youth parties and nightclubs, or to his home? Times have changed, he told his parents. You're like mammoths. Your views on fidelity, no cheating, are outdated. Robert and Elizabeth did not push him too much, did not bring him up, did not hurry him to settle down, to meet his one and only woman. Let him go out for the time being. It's a young thing, they decided. They were now much more concerned about an unexpected problem that loomed on the horizon. Their daughter Catherine had just turned 15. It was time to think about her future profession. The girl's mind was filled with illusions and fantasies. She decided to become an actress and went to the theater club for the second year. Last week, a friend of the teacher, who works as a choirmaster, unexpectedly came to the class. She was interested in Catherine, who was performing a simple song from the play at the rehearsal. The woman was impressed by her voice and took her parents' contacts. Later, she found Robert and Elizabeth, met with them, and was shocked by the news. Your girl has an extraordinary, rare vocal gift. I listened to her in detail after that chance meeting. It would be a crime if you didn't give her music and vocal training. Who knows? Maybe we're looking at a future great opera singer. Robert and Elizabeth stared at her. Yes, the choral specialist nodded. You heard right. Your daughter has a unique voice which now looks like a rough diamond that will become a magnificent diamond. But Catherine is already 15 years old, Elizabeth said thoughtfully. Isn't it too late for her to learn music and singing? The choirmaster smiled slyly. It's never too late to become a singer, or to learn anything at all. It's strange that you didn't notice that your daughter has such a beautiful voice. Yes, singing never really stood out in front of them. Robert tried to explain his ignorance. Only at matinees in kindergarten. And later her singing I will not remember. The girl saw her vocation in another, remembered herself in the theater, in the cinema as an actress, hastened to dispel his doubts. Woman. And the decision, of course, you. But if I were you, I would buy a piano without delay and devote all her free time to vocal lessons. I'll find the necessary specialists for such a gifted child. I look forward to your call. The piano for Catherine was bought the following week. It's expensive and very beautiful. It's beautiful to look at and play on. Robert personally supervised the loading and unloading of the instrument. He was afraid that the movers would do something wrong. On the platform of the third floor, it seemed to the man that the workers were about to drop their purchase. What's holding this enormous thing on its sides? It's awkward, unstable, he thought. Robert lunged forward, picked up the piano from the side so it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands, and immediately slid to the floor. His eyes went black with pain, and he could hardly move. The movers frightenedly surrounded the client. One of them rushed to the 5th floor to call Elizabeth. The ambulance arrived quickly. At the hospital, the doctors only shook their heads. Too rapid turn of the body, trying to pick up a heavy instrument, did their job. Robert's condition could only be improved by surgery, for which the man immediately began to prepare. It was entrusted to a young, ambitious surgeon, Madison. Already in an hour, she came to get acquainted with her new patient and froze. He was so handsome. Madison, as is often the case in academic and career circles, had shown great promise since medical school. Her father was a brilliant surgeon, and her mother was an equally savvy operating gynecologist. The girl was already accustomed from childhood in the house to constant medical conversations and discussions. Other future as to join the family dynasty, for herself did not see. Personal life, at a rather pretty young woman, did not add up. Robert and Madison were a college couple who had married hastily, but soon divorced after a few carefree relationships. By the age of 30, Madison was left with a bad experience and a burning desire to make things right. She fell in love with Robert at first sight. He scheduled the surgery in 5 days. Madison went to work on her residency in confusion. She had a picture in front of her eyes, snow-white bedding, dark hair with barely visible sagebrush on the pillow, and startling blue eyes filled with pain. She'll make this man smile and forget his ailment. Or is she not a first-rate surgeon? And then there's his wife, Jacqueline, who's always getting underfoot. A gray mouse with big gray eyes. What could they possibly have in common? After all, they'd been living together for quite a while. The grown children came to visit their father. Madison grinned wryly, can't push the wife away. I'm on night duty tomorrow. I'll take the bull by the horns as soon as my patient starts thinking and feeling better after the anesthetic. That day and the next seemed endless to her. She ran to Robert under any pretext, touched his forehead with a cool palm, listened to his lungs for some reason. The patient was indifferent to all her manipulations, reviving only when his wife appeared in the room. Nothing, my darling, Madison thought. You don't know yet what a surprise I've prepared for myself. By evening the next day, the surgical ward was nearly empty by evening. Elizabeth was going home too. There were some things to be done there. Robert's surgery was coming up soon. After it, she would be with him 24 hours a day for the first time. The children's meals have to be cooked, the house cleaned, the laundry done. Robert is feeling a little better so far. Now all that's left is to get through the surgery. Madison waited until Robert was alone. When all was quiet, she went to his room, where he was alone. The man was dozing uneasily. She snuck under the covers to the patient. The man flinched in surprise and stared at her with uncomprehending eyes. What's going on here? How did you get here? What do you want? Robert asked excitedly. Relax, Robert, his doctor whispered in his ear in a different voice. I like you a lot. Too much. But Robert felt only rejection, squeamishness, disgust. Are you crazy, Madison? I didn't give you any preferential treatment. I didn't hint. I didn't seek your favor. I love and respect my wife Jacqueline too much to even have such thoughts. Such an invasion of his personal territory was beyond his moral comprehension. So he pressed the button to call the nursing staff. Soon a nurse appeared in the room. Her eyes rounded at the scene she had uncovered. Madison was huddled like a snake in the restroom. The man was still looking around fearfully. After calming him down, the nurse snidely asked the doctor on duty, Madison, do you need my help or can I go? There was no response. The woman in the restroom remained silent. A little while later, she quietly walked out of there. Turning around, she gritted her teeth. You'll remember this concert. No one has ever humiliated me like that. Passing by the post, the duty nurse could not help but notice the ironic smile of her colleague. Tomorrow the whole department would know about the night incident. Madison had no doubt about that. so she kept a low profile for the remaining days before the surgery. She kept thinking of one idea. Robert did not say a word, did not show anything that could arouse suspicion in his wife about the night incident. He didn't want to upset her with such trivialities. He was polite but cold to Madison. The day of the surgery was finally set for tomorrow. The meeting with the doctor had already taken place. Only Elizabeth was a little nervous. After all, she hadn't sung for a long time, and tomorrow she had scheduled an extremely important meeting with 2 vocal teachers at once. Robert only laughed at Elizabeth's fears. The surgery is elective, not the most complicated, while I'm under anesthesia on the table. You'll have just enough time to meet with everyone and talk things over, Robert said. It's about the future of our daughter, Catherine. You have to be with me, and I'll be transferred to the intensive care unit first. You will come closer to the evening, when you have solved all the questions about the training of our young talent. That was the deal. Surgery to remove a herniated disc in the lumbar spine was not something unusual for Madison, so all her movements were honed to automaticity. She was a surgical professional who knew exactly what she could and could not do. Glimpse once again admiring the beautiful face of the patient, she gave the command to the assistants to serve something, bring something, and herself touched the nerve endings at the site of the operation so that no one noticed. In the protocol of manipulation of this nuance, Madison did not enter. After congratulating her colleagues on the end of the operation, she told the orderlies to bring Robert into the intensive care unit to observe the exit from anesthesia. A reaction to her experiment was to follow later. That was okay. She would wait. She was patient. At 3 a.m., she got a call from the ICU. Madison, your patient is awake, but he can't feel his legs. Madison, come to us right away. We don't understand why there's such a serious complication. Stupid, the woman grinned to herself. I paralyzed him on the operating table forever. But you will never know why he is paralyzed. That secret will go to the grave with me. Because a woman cannot be cornered by unthinkable humiliation. No one dares to reject me. Not even such a handsome man. Madison searched her soul diligently and found not a shred of pity for her patient. What's more, she only now remembered how she knew the man so well. He was the guy who'd graced billboards around town when her mom was into chocolate liquor. And her victim turns out to be a screen star. So much the worse for him. Now his business will be over. How weird is that? Didn't she take the Hippocratic Oath, which includes do no harm? Madison immediately answered herself. I took an oath as a future doctor, and his nerve endings were touched by an offended woman. Now, your inviolable marriage, Mr. Plotnitsky, will you touch? I'll see how long it will take you both to portray the eternal, faithful to each other Tristan and Isolde. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was rushing to the hospital to Robert with good news. She had managed to arrange for piano and vocal lessons with both teachers. Already tomorrow, Catherine would begin to make up for lost time, to prepare for admission to the music school. Her daughter was pleased. Joan was a parasite, he kept laughing. What a parasite. But it's going to happen. We now have our own Maria Callas or Montserrat Cabali in the family, he said, laughing. Then the 3 of them laughed contagiously, drank tea with scones and cherry jam, discussed that soon Robert would return, and life would go on as usual. Then the children went about their business, and Elizabeth hurried to Robert's house, remembering to bring some goodies for him. At the clinic, putting on a robe, the woman already approached her husband's room, where he was transferred from the intensive care unit. But then she heard the nurses whispering, Lord, why should such a beautiful man be punished by God? I cleaned his floors, and he lies like a statue. Recently he was taken down from the intensive care unit. He can't feel half of his torso from below. What a grief for the family. Elizabeth's legs gave out and she flopped down on the couch. It can't be. What are they saying about Robert? That there are no other handsome men in the hospital. He's the only one having surgery today. Her head rumbled, soothing thoughts. But the heart couldn't lie. It knew the truth, and it bled like a wounded animal. Something had gone wrong for her husband Robert today. Fate had handed down a sentence that could not be reversed. Robert's condition had not changed a bit in a day, a month, or a year. During that time, he and Elizabeth had gone through several stages of acceptance. First, the man was in sullen despair, then in prostration, then in anger at the circumstances. He shouted at Elizabeth, "You must leave me. It is not proper for a woman of 40 to sleep in a cold bed. You realize I'm not a man anymore." Elizabeth reacted to his outbursts in different ways. She cried or, on the contrary, laughed, said that this is nothing, that this is not the main thing in the relationship between a man and a woman. She found new arguments for her husband. Robert, for a while, seemed to calm down. But inside he still did not agree with her, as it seemed to him, unnecessary devotion. He thought that she was burying her feminine nature, took on an impossible burden. He would surely figure out a way to free her from that heavy cross. Madison got off lightly at work. There was a meeting to analyze the actions of everyone involved in that unfortunate operation. Independent experts reviewed the entire protocol of the surgical procedure in detail. They found no medical errors. The patient's complications were attributed to his personal physiologic peculiarities. Madison continued to work in the department, even without a reprimand or reprimands in her file, as if nothing had happened. Only the nurse on duty that night, when the surgeon unusually visited Robert's room, suddenly decided to change her job. She found a position as head nurse on Madison's father's ward. Such a happy coincidence. The girl was smart, and she wouldn't talk about what she'd seen. Only Madison hinted that it was strange how everything with the patient turned out, at the right time in the right place. She didn't have a problem with it. All the more reason for her to feel like she'd overstayed her welcome in the ranks. A nurse with her experience would like to find a bigger position. The two women, Elizabeth and Jacqueline, understand each other and agree. Not long after the heated scandals and Robert's attempts to talk Elizabeth into a divorce, their home became suspiciously quiet and calm. The man was increasingly digging with some blueprints, inventing something. At work in an advertising company, given his early merits, such trouble was left for him. The place of a freelance technical development consultant was formalized on a remote mode and faithfully paid a small allowance called salary. Elizabeth was still working in her small firm, but as an economist. The salary was low, and her savvy helped. Back when Robert was in favor, smiling at everyone from every other billboard in town, she saved some money, put it in the bank for a long time at a fairly high interest rate. There was enough for bread and butter, and even sometimes their favorite blackcurrant jam. With entertainment, Catherine had to temper her appetite a little. But the children loved their father so much that they took it for granted, so there were no serious material worries in the family. After a couple of months of hard work, Robert asked Elizabeth to invite his colleague Michael to dinner. He explained that he and Michael have long had a warm friendship, so he wants to ask him to help with the launch of a new invention in the shooting of commercials. We had a good time. We recalled funny incidents from the life of the native company. Michael lamented that the face of the advertising kingdom could disappear from the screen, and then Long asked Robert to take one and another pose. He gave his resume later. "My profession as a cameraman taught me to shoot people in a variety of angles. You've become even more photogenic, Robert. There's something in your eyes. So now we have to base our commercials on your close-ups. It'll be an even bigger success, I guarantee it." Michael was not the least bit mistaken. Advertising office furniture, in which Robert filmed in a huge office improvised boss, the public was accepted by the hurrah. Respectable and dressed with needle, a very handsome man with intelligent eyes created the image of an ideal boss who wants to obey unconditionally. And no one needed to know how to shoot immobilized Robert, laying cushions in the high luxurious chair of a modern manager. After the first experience began to appear other orders. Former magnitude in them was not, but decent money for the family to earn quite well received. Robert, as before, came up with some interesting additions to the technical equipment of the situation in the frame. Everything together made their commercials in demand on the advertising market. Elizabeth breathed a little sigh of relief that her husband had abandoned his idea that they should get a divorce. At least he wasn't having any more unpleasant conversations on the subject. Robert was troubled by something else. After that dinner at their home, he noticed with what sympathy Michael is interested in his wife's affairs, secretly asking him how she is doing. Goes casually on the street when Elizabeth comes to pick up Robert from the shooting. A slightly wild plan was growing and solidifying in Robert's mind. He decided to let his wife go so she could live life to the fullest again. For the cause took zealously, and became even closer to the handsome cameraman, and began to often invite him to the house. On various far-fetched occasions encouraged his attention to his wife. A woman's heart is not a stone. Elizabeth, who had long been ignorant of other people's attention from cavaliers, was susceptible to Michael's behavior. He carried flowers, candy, and fruit to her every time, as if he were courting her. When was the last time she had a date in her life? Over 20 years ago, and now she was living in a cocoon of constant moral fatigue. No, she thought. I have not fallen out of love with my dear Robert. I have always been faithful to him. But sometimes one wants spring in one's soul so much. It is so hard to give up its blooming signs that promise joy. Robert at all these meetings between the three of them was as unperturbed as an iceberg. He pretended not to see that around him hovering love vibes from Michael, and Elizabeth is often embarrassed and does not know how to behave. Moreover, when the advertising company has a loud corporate party, he suddenly said he was sick, complaining of severe back pain. When Michael began to persuade Elizabeth not to miss such an interesting event, suddenly came to life, fussed, began to prove to his wife that she must have fun this evening. And then only supermarkets, pharmacies, nowhere to go. At the party, where for once Elizabeth dressed up in her best cocktail dresses, no one cared about her and Michael. People were enjoying champagne and stronger drinks, snacking from baskets, salad boxes, and desserts. Elizabeth and Michael did a lot of dancing. Elizabeth felt a little dizzy. How long had it been since she'd had a close relationship? A year? 2, 3? She had already lost count, trying never to think about it. After a soulful evening, they didn't take a cab. They decided to take a short walk along the promenade. Elizabeth soon got cold, so Michael threw his jacket over her shoulders and tried to hug her. She rejected his attempt. This conversation is not working, Michael thought. I love you, Elizabeth. Suddenly, Michael took a firm step toward her. I realize I shouldn't be having this conversation with you. You're married, and Robert is my companion. From the outside, my confession seems mean to someone who is not quite healthy, but I can't help it. I am drawn to you with such force that I am losing my head. Elizabeth was embarrassed by his confession, but answered him honestly. The worst part of it all is that I like you too. I wouldn't call it love, but you touch some strings in my feminine soul. Michael looked hopefully into her eyes. Shall I take your answer to mean that I have a chance to win your favor? Let's switch to you after all. I think we can leave all this superfluous ceremony behind already. Elizabeth answered slowly, as if considering something. We'll certainly transition to you easily. That's not the point, Elizabeth replied. You have to understand, Michael, Robert is my life, my only man, the father of my children, my soul and my heart. Right now, I may have the beginnings of a simple desire. I'm alive. But I'm not going to cheat on my husband. He and I are what they call for better or for worse let our heads sit on the same pillow, like Robert's. He's already gone gray since his surgery. I'm not arguing with that either. I'm just covering up the gray that's coming in so he won't see it. Think about it. Do you want a woman like me? Is it worth loving me and wasting precious time of your life? Michael was more serious than ever. All remnants of the champagne he'd drunk at the party were gone. I'll wait, Elizabeth. As long as it takes for you to realize how you really feel about me. I won't even remind you of that. But you should know that at any hour of the day or night, the doors of my bachelor pad are open to you. Let you not confuse that I am 7 years younger, that I have never been married, that having no experience in family life, I will learn everything quickly if next to me will be a woman like you. Then they were silent most of the time at home. Everyone was thinking about his own things. They didn't want to talk. Elizabeth didn't know what to do. Should she tell her husband that Michael had confessed his love to her, that he had promised to wait for her if she decided to leave Robert? She decided against it. She never said a word about that conversation. Michael decided otherwise. He decided to have a frank talk with Robert because he doesn't want to do anything behind his back. He considers it dishonest. He will ask his comrade to let his wife be happy and let her go to another man. That is, to him. Stalling for an explanation he would not. There was too much at stake for himself. He was not really an ardent bachelor, had on the male account of a womanizer dozens of short-lived novels. But his heart was silent. As a professional cameraman, he could spot beauty, distinguish artificial grimaces. He fell in love with Jennifer like an inexperienced boy. The imperfect figure of the not young girl excited him so much that after meeting Jennifer for a long time he could not calm the rapid pulse. She wasn't a fan of makeup. Her childishly naive gray eyes were without a single dab of mascara. He thought that was even better. He didn't see any flaws or imperfections in her, didn't notice what she was wearing today. All he cared about was her mood and her condition. Did she feel good? Was she not too tired? When they found themselves alone without her husband at the corporate ball, he felt like he was on a date with a woman for the first time in his life. Everything he'd had before her had been erased from his soul, from his memory. He was starting his life with a clean slate in matters of communication with the opposite sex. Only this way, not the other way around. The moment he pulled off his jacket and threw it over Jennifer's frozen back, he decided for himself that it was now or never, but he had to talk to her. He had an acquaintance who worked at the clinic where Robert had been operated on, so he knew the whole situation. His chosen one, his Jennifer, should be living life to the fullest. She's only a little over 40. It's a crime against her life. That's what fate had decreed. The conversation between Michael and Robert took place 3 days later. In the living room, two destinies, two contenders for happiness, in love and in love for many years, came together, a cripple and a healthy, strong man, a man who had lost all hope and a man who was very much hoping for happiness. They did not shirk. They were honest with each other to the end. "I love her more than life," Michael asked. "Let her go, she can still be happy. I offered her a divorce when I found out about my diagnosis and future prospects," Robert explained. "She wouldn't leave. Let her decide for herself." They parted not as enemies, not as friends. Before they did, they called Elizabeth and told her that they had had such a difficult but honest conversation. She suddenly took offense. "I'm not a thing. Why are you dividing me behind my back and without telling me?" Elizabeth said. Michael replied that it was Robert's will. He explained that he didn't want to cause her any unnecessary pain. It was so confusing, so frightening. The circumstances proposed for the three of them were not impossible. They could even be called quite civilized. But that didn't make it any easier for their trio. No one yet understood what the decision of a woman who was loved by two worthy men would be. For several days, everything in Robert's house was as if no sharp, momentous proposals had come from Michael. The man himself had gone quiet somewhere, never showing his face. Elizabeth fiddled with the daily chores and paid even more attention to caring for her husband, but was mostly suspiciously silent. Joan's downfall. Another stormy affair, and yet another piece of news rocked them. He was offered to star in a commercial, also to be the face of the company, but a youthful one. He was bursting with pride. "I am also handsome and will soon appear on the first billboards in the city," he said. His father, having listened to his enthusiastic story about his first successes, cooled his ardor a little. "Son, beauty has two sides. My mother and I still turn a blind eye to the endless round dance of your girls. But at some point you'll have to stop, settle down, choose the one you want to live with for the rest of your life." Joan retorted, "Dad, you're talking like you're in the last century. Love is one woman for life. Do you believe in these fairy tales? Even though you and Mom have been together for more than 20 years, you have an ironclad certainty that it will always be like that." Robert shivered. He didn't have that certainty right now. He didn't know. What if Elizabeth still wanted to try a different kind of happiness? These thoughts were slowly making him mad. And yet, he loved her so much that he was willing to let her go. A woman shouldn't have to give up on herself. The atmosphere in the apartment was a little annoying to Catherine. She spent the whole day right after school, disappeared at music lessons, and then at home sang romances, which she now passed with the teacher at the top of her voice. Lines from a gorgeous piece were now being sung, touching the notes of romance in her soul. Elizabeth was washing dishes in the kitchen and thought wistfully, "Everything feels like it's pushing me toward Michael. Or maybe I'm looking everywhere for signs, pointers." I sometimes shuddered at the memory of that evening. I couldn't lie to myself. The dilemma: how to move on. After a conversation between the two men who love her, circumstances, as always, pushed her to the denouement. The video with her husband in the lead role took first place in a contest of advertising products. To receive the award had to be not anywhere, but in Chicago. That's where the competition was held, regional companies. With this news, Michael again appeared in their house, enthusiastic, handsome, with hope in his burning eyes. "Robert, Elizabeth, this is such a success, such heights. You and I must go to Chicago for this prestigious award. I will help as much as possible to make the trip comfortable," he said. Robert's mind immediately thought, here it is, the one that will make all the difference. Elizabeth must go to Chicago with Michael without me. I will let her go at any cost. Robert was a little miffed that he did not have to persuade his wife to go to Chicago. He immediately considered it a bad sign for him, a harbinger of the separation that would follow the trip. He was engaged in an inner dialogue with himself. What did you really want? That she would voluntarily enroll as a nun. You haven't touched her in 3 years. Robert moved defiantly into the living room to the large upholstered sofa. Elizabeth was packing her suitcase. No closet antics, no special outfits. Leaning toward restraint. This will be a business trip. I'll just act as my husband's official representative and go straight home, she thought. But then why had she put her prettiest lingerie at the bottom of the suitcase? She'd stuffed the bottle of perfume in her pocket, the one Michael had said at the party that smelled so good. Had she already made up her mind, and was she just fooling men? But after all, in her heart is still no answer to the question that concerns them both: who will she choose? In Chicago, in order not to waste time, Michael and Elizabeth arrived by airplane. The events were designed for 3 days. They would also have the opportunity to walk around the city. At the hotel, their rooms were on opposite sides of the hallway, but on the same floor. Elizabeth quickly changed into comfortable jeans, sneakers, and a long sleeve. Screw all the dresses and high-heeled shoes. I only brought them for tomorrow's ceremony. Charming Michael is not part of my plans, she thought. They had dinner right in the hotel restaurant. There was neither the energy nor the desire to look for something else. Before, Michael and Elizabeth had not felt constrained in each other's company, but now it was as if they had a bond of silence. They did not speak, but stuttered on every word. "Do you like it? It's amazingly picturesque," Michael kept saying. His favorite place of power turned out to be a fenced area on the roof of a high-rise building with benches, tables, and even umbrellas from the sun, which were now rolled up. Tidy, cozy, unusual. On the walls, colorful drawings, graffiti. Now they were here alone amidst the city lights fading into twilight, and beneath them was all of Chicago in the palm of their hands. A mesmerizing sight. After drinking wine from a plastic cup, Elizabeth felt a sense of relaxation begin to blossom inside her for the first time. There was a beauty in the change of scenery, after all. Conversation was effortless now. Michael talked about his childhood, about his parents, who lived in a small town near Chicago. They loved their greenhouses, where they grew several unusual varieties of tomatoes. When fresh salad greens appeared on the table, there you could find fruits ranging in color from orange and yellow to black. Michael pulled Elizabeth to him, kissed her. She did not push him away as before, but responded to his kiss. "They like you," Michael said. "Who?" Jennifer didn't understand. "My parents," he explained. "They're very simple, but they're also very warm-hearted people. They'll be easy for you to be with." She didn't say anything against it. She couldn't forget his kiss. And he realized it in his gut. They went to his room in the hotel. After that sleepless night of awarding a statuette for the best work of her husband, as a model of commercials Elizabeth remembered as in a fog, then she and Michael had nothing to stop them from being together for 2 more days. The man thought triumphantly, Elizabeth is mine now. She will now leave Robert for good. There can be no doubt about that. He did not ask her anything about it. He was absolutely sure. They flew home in silence. It seemed to him that there was a complete understanding between them. From the airport they went to his house. Hastily, in 4 hands, prepared dinner. Again they locked in a long embrace. They fell asleep in the morning. When Michael awoke, Elizabeth was gone. On the nightstand next to his bed was a note: "Michael, I'm sorry I'm a jerk because I only used you. I had to figure out, can I do it without Robert? The answer is no. You're a very good man. You're very gentle. But my heart tells me I don't love you and I never will. There's still only room for my husband. Thank you for everything." He didn't understand anything. He reread the text of the note, looked around once more. All of Elizabeth's things had disappeared from the bedroom. Would she go back to Robert again? Michael didn't kid himself. A woman like Elizabeth would indeed return to her husband, love him further, understanding everything, and endure the hardships associated with it. And the fact that she gave a temporary weakness, it is understandable. Elizabeth honestly told Michael that she was alive. He immediately added another epithet of his own real. Michael immediately forgave her and, moreover, did not have any claims to her, did not think that she humiliated his male ego. Robert woke up reluctantly, out of inertia. He did not want to stay in this world. After all, Michael and Elizabeth were supposed to return home from New York yesterday. But Elizabeth never showed up. So she hadn't made her choice in his favor. Joan had gone to a sleepover at a friend's house last night, threatening to spend the whole weekend with her. And Catherine was getting some sleep after the recital. Robert sniffed his nose and thought how strange. The apartment smells like my favorite cheesecakes with raisins and vanilla. Is Catherine up at the crack of dawn and working in the kitchen? The man quickly pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt, moved into his wheelchair, and drove to the smell of fried cottage cheese. In the kitchen, with his back to him, his Elizabeth was fiddling in a stretched homemade bright yellow t-shirt and black and white checked capri pants, his favorite. The boiling kettle whistled on the stove, so she didn't hear the sound of the stroller pulling into the kitchen. That's what a loving woman's heart is capable of. Like a barometer, it picks up any changes in the family atmosphere. Elizabeth instantly turned around and saw the happy blue eyes looking at her with mute adoration. She rushed to the man, knelt down, and embraced his motionless legs. "Can you forget and forgive me all that has happened during these 3 days of my absence?" Elizabeth asked. I could not resist. The native instinct of woman was stronger than my moral principles. But I have learned the most important thing: there can be no other man on this earth, and in the whole universe, but you, and let only death separate us, but very soon. Tears flowed from Robert's eyes. He wasn't going to resent her. He loved her too much and wanted her to be happy. Even if not with him, but what happiness it was. His woman had chosen him again out of a million men, just as she had done then, more than 20 years ago. Could any new misfortunes ruin their love now? Michael asked her quietly. So, together again. And now forever? Elizabeth answered. Yes, only like that, only together, my love. At that moment, the honored Catherine came into the kitchen. Like her father before, she too was attracted by the curious aroma. "Mom, are you making your specialty cheesecakes?" she exclaimed. "I'm the first to taste." She reached for the ruddy curds on her plate, not even bothering to scoop Elizabeth's sour cream into her cup. "By the way, my dear parents, why are you at the movies this morning? It's not like we haven't seen each other in 3 or 4 days." "What a tragedy," said Catherine carelessly. Elizabeth thought to herself that a tragedy could have happened if she had made the wrong decision, and Robert could think of nothing at all. He had dissolved into his wife. How good life is, even in a wheelchair. You just have to realize it in time, appreciate it, feel it. Sometimes it's even possible to persevere through tough trials. He and Elizabeth did.